for an island. Burke was much simpler. As for where it is, it's west of here, about 3 hours flight. You've been there? Finn asked in surprise, climbing onto the ship after his dad. He sighed, bracing a hand against his ribcage as he touched down. No. My grandfather tried to make peace with Jut in his early years as chief. As far as I can remember, they didn't take too kindly to the offer. Therefore, my dad was also unsuccessful. Hiccup frowned. Come to think of it, I don't think he ever tried. Finn perused a table covered in all sorts of items to trade or buy. He could already feel his bag of coins getting lighter at his belt. So why are they coming here? I expect we'll find out soon enough. Hiccup lifted a jewel-encrusted dagger with interest. Oh, let me see that. Finn hopped over with wide eyes. A chuckle sounded behind them. You surely are your mother's son, Master Finn. Hey, Johann. Finn turned and shook the man's hand. They both have very good taste, Hiccup commented, turning to Johann. Astrid was looking at it. Indeed. However, she decided on a less handsome piece. I believe her chosen phrase was Johann threw up a couple fingers for air quotes. More practical for daily use. Father and son chuckled. Still Hiccup pulled out a pouch of coins. Sometimes there's a place for nicer things. How much? I'll take it, Hiccup. A gift for the missus. Johann, we've talked about this. I couldn't possibly. Johann, I know for a fact that this has traveled a long way. I'm not taking it for free. Finn scoffed as he inspected a variety of metal shields. How could you possibly know how far it's traveled, Dad? And tell you all my secrets? Hiccup asked, incredulous. Absolutely not. PFT. Finn rolled his eyes while the older men laughed behind him. Chief and trader finally settled on an agreed price, including a few items that Johann admitted he would need for his next trip. It was then that Finn realized Johann had been doing this job for decades, long before his dad had become chief. Hiccup had known Johann for most of his life. Johann's hair and beard were streaked with grey, the skin around his eyes wrinkled. Finn knew that Johann was getting up in age, surely he'd need to retire in the next few years. He seriously doubted the old man would be able to keep going for much longer. Despite these thoughts, he watched in amazement as Johann scurried around the boat, lifting items of various heights, lengths and weight. He seemed sprightly enough, but Finn would have to ask his dad later what he thought of the elderly man and what would become of his business when he retired. Wanted to ask you about this delegation, Johann. Finn snapped to attention, even as he continued shopping. Ah yes, what about it? Why are they coming? Nothing to fear, Hiccup. They are coming under the banner of friendship. Finn's brow wrinkled, even as his dad replied, Jut has never shown us friendship before. In fact, they've shown quite the opposite. 50 years ago or more years ago, Chief. Jushans are still a highly traditional people, but trust me, Master Hiccup, I would not recommend this meeting if I thought they were hiding ill contempt. Wait, you suggested this? Finn whirled around, wincing at the annoying pain in his side. Johann gulped under the hard gaze of the chief and his son. They asked who I might recommend. They will explain everything when they get here, I assure you. I trust them as much as I trust you, sir. Still Hiccup said quietly. I hope next time you might ask my approval before risking the security of my island, Johann. The trader winced but stood firm in his words. I understand, sir. Just give them a chance to speak, that's all I ask. Oh, I'll give them a chance, Hiccup amended. Just don't make me regret it, Johann. Finn returned to the table covered in weapons in front of him, growing bored of the discussion. The coming delegation had piqued his interest, though he could sense his father's unease. He hoped nothing serious would happen, mostly because if anybody got violent, he was in no position to fight. In fact, he knew his dad would have him removed from the area without discussion. With a sigh, he withdrew from the weapons table and walked to a closed cabinet. Opening it wide, he found a large stack of old animal skin maps, brown and musty with age. Unrolling one, he scanned the worn page for Burke, then moved his finger to the west. It took a bit of time, but eventually he found the little island of Jut, looking small and insignificant on the map. He didn't have much experience going west. Most of their allies were to the north and south. Berserker Island laid to the east, Outcast Island to the southeast. The only time he'd traveled with his dad on a delegation trip himself, they'd had no reason to go west. Running footsteps drew his attention. He replaced the map and turned in time to see Alton Brand swing onto the deck of the ship. He blinked in surprise. The teenager was nearly to his nose in height. "Wow, look at you." "That's what I said." Hiccup smiled, nodding at the teenager in greeting. Alton clapped Finn on the shoulder with a modest shrug. "What can I say except thank the gods I'm taller than Inga now?" Finn snorted. "Luckily I've never had that problem." "Yeah, lucky." Alton rolled his eyes. "Johan, I can take over whenever you're ready for a break." "That sounds mighty nice right now, thank you laddie." Before another word could be spoken, the sound of a loud horn blasted across the harbor. Hiccup swiveled on the spot and ran to the edge of the deck, closely followed by the others. Finn elbowed his way between his dad and Johan, blue eyes on the horizon. A ship had cleared the sea stacks and was heading their way through the stone warriors that guarded the entrance to the island. The delegation from Jut had arrived. Hiccup wheeled around and left the ship without looking back. Finn sorely wished he could follow, but knew he didn't have the strength or energy to follow him up the steep incline. "Where's he going?" Alton asked. "Probably to gather the council," Finn murmured. He watched as the ship slowly crept toward the docks. He began to see the vague outline of men on the ship, looking eagerly toward his village. Were these men peaceful? What did they want with their humble village? Was he worrying for nothing, like his dad, or was there something less than friendly in their intentions? With a jolt, Finn left the ship and whistled for Zap. He didn't know what to expect, but as much as he hated to admit it, he couldn't protect himself. Not with his sight still healing. He needed his dragon by his side, at least until they knew what these people wanted. He smiled with satisfaction as Zap dove out of the village with Toothless on her tail, following a wide variety of councilmen and women on their dragons. They spread out across the area, following the ship's movements with well-trained eyes. Zap touched down beside him and he turned to face the ship as finally, it docked. Chapter 22, Jet of Gold. Chapter text. As the ship approached from the harbor and neared the docks, Hiccup's mind flew into overdrive. He didn't expect anything dangerous from these men, but he couldn't be too careful. Despite the fact that they'd sailed with a white flag at the topmast, he couldn't help but wonder what was the purpose for this impromptu meeting, and if things wouldn't get messy if plans went awry. Armed to the teeth with weapons and dragons alike, his wife and son at his side and the council fanned out behind, they were prepared for anything. He knew the entourage from Jet wouldn't make it 3 steps into the village without his say-so. They wouldn't make any attempts as far as he was concerned. His knowledge on Jet was minimal, but last he'd heard they weren't on familiar terms with dragons. That alone told him that they'd steer clear of doing anything rash. He couldn't help but shoot Finn a short, worried glance. What if something happened here on the docks? The last thing he needed was to fight. He'd tear his wound back open and need to restart his rehabilitation just as he was starting to get better. "Dad, I'm fine," Finn muttered. Hiccup scowled. "Just don't do anything stupid." "Dad. The second anything goes down, I want you on Zap End." "Dad, I know," Finn growled in a hushed whisper. "You don't have to." "Quiet, they're almost to the docks," Astrid hissed. Toothless growled low in his throat as the ship finally made port. Hiccup made no moves to stop him and instead watched the men scurry around the deck of the Jatan ship. Despite the unease gnawing in his stomach, he kept his expression calm and neutral. His gaze flicked through each individual, gauging their status based on the jobs they were doing and who they looked to for orders. The only authority figure he could pick out of the group was a thick, bearded man with graying blonde hair, a helmet on his head and the fur cloak of a chieftain on his shoulders. He had a kind face and dark brown eyes that he could spot even from this distance. Hiccup's assumption that this man was the chief was quickly disproved when a much younger man stepped to the edge and peered down at them. It was obvious that this man must be Ivan Sullivan, the chief of Jut, based on the subtle movements of the other shipmates, and Hiccup assumed the older man must be his father, the former chief. It was traditional for some chieftains to continue to wear status robes and cloaks even after retirement. He was sure his own father would have done the same if he'd lived to see Hiccup take the mantle. Ivan was tall and broad-shouldered like his father, yet his hair was dark and pulled back into a short tail. He too had a calm expression on his face, but Hiccup could tell that he was no pushover. While the older man looked simply pleased to be here, the chief himself looked slightly wary as if he was unsure of the reception their arrival had brought. "Are you Chief Haddock?" Ivan asked in a deep baritone voice. "I am," Hiccup replied, stepping toward the ship with an arm outstretched. "Welcome to Berk." Ivan bent down and grasped his arm tightly. Hiccup didn't miss how Ivan's eyes shot to his mismatched feet, the surprise barely masked in his expression. "Thank you for allowing us to dock, sir." Hiccup gave him a wry smile. "Well, I could hardly refuse, since you've invited yourselves." The Jatans stiffened on the ship. "Luckily, I'm open-minded." He gestured for them to disembark, and the men visibly relaxed. While the ladder was lowered and the men joined him on the dock, Hiccup shared a quick glance with Finn and Snotlout. They both had their arms crossed and he had to bite back the amusement that suddenly overcame him. They both had the same distrusting scowl on their faces. Ivan signaled the older man, who stepped forward. "Sir, this is my father, Kiev Sullivan, former chief of Jat." Kiev stepped forward and eagerly shook Hiccup's hand. "Sir, it's truly a pleasure to meet you at last. The famous Dragon Conqueror, I truly admire your work." Hiccup couldn't resist the easy smile. "Call me Hiccup." "Gentlemen, can I introduce you to my wife, Astrid?" Axe glittering in the sunlight from her back, Astrid stepped forward and shook their hands in turn. Kiev winced in slight surprise when he withdrew his hand, flexing his fingers. "Strong grip." "Yes, she likes to break fingers." Hiccup agreed, ignoring her smirk. "And this is our son, Fearless Finn." He barely turned an inch and Finn was already there, shaking both of the men's hands. A part of him burst with pride when they gaped at the teenager in surprise. "The Fearless Finn?" Kiev asked with awe. Finn bit back a smirk. "Call me Finn, sir." "Ah, modest like his father, I see." Kiev elbowed his own son in a jesting sort of way. "I like them already." Ivan barely stopped himself from rolling his eyes. "Father, please, this is a serious meeting." "Apologies son, I'm just so excited." Kiev gazed up at the random villagers flying past on dragons. Hiccup laughed. "Well, a serious meeting shouldn't be had on the docks. If you and your men will follow us to the Great Hall, we can discuss what you came for." "Of course, thank you, sir." Ivan nodded and followed him as the Haddocks led the way up to the village. In a low voice, Hiccup said to Finn, "You don't have to sit through this." "Are you kidding?" Finn whispered back. "I'm as eager to hear what they have to say as you are. And why shouldn't I be there, if they are fellow chieftains?" Hiccup shrugged with a smile. "Fair enough. Spoken like a true future chief." Astrid smiled, looping her arm through Finn's and marching up the gangplanks. Hiccup kept one eye on the Jat delegates and the other on his villagers. Many of them had paused in their daily routine to watch the entourage pass through. A few children gazed up at the unfamiliar faces with awe and confusion. Kiev winked at Eric's niece and the child ducked behind her father's leg. He quickly noticed, however, that the Jatans steered clear of any dragons that crossed their path. They hadn't made any moves toward Toothless when they first met, which was unusual for anyone to claim or for his deeds as the Dragon Conqueror without giving Toothless his due recognition as well. After all, he'd be nowhere without his dragon. He pondered these things as they filed their way up the steps and entered the Great Hall. He allowed the delegates to spread out through the mostly empty hall to rest after their long trip, while the chief and his few councilmen sat around the table with Hiccup and his own team. Hiccup's gaze lingered on Finn, whose face was red and sweaty. He willed himself not to say anything in front of all these newcomers, knowing that it would hurt Finn's pride more than it was worth to mention. It was Finn's pride, however, that had probably kept him at the front of the pack, and now he showing the physical signs of weakness. As the Jatans settled in their seats, he slid his gaze to Rough Nut, a few seats down from him. She raised an eyebrow and he quickly jerked his head toward Finn. As one of the go-to healers, she instantly understood and left the table. "All right, Let's get this meeting underway. Hiccup said finally, his voice cutting through the din. He gestured toward Ivan sitting across from him. The floor is open. Thank you, sir. Ivan began, but paused when Ruffnut and a barmaid made their way around the table, setting tall jugs of ale and water in front of every individual. All the Jatans thanked them as they passed. Hiccup was grateful for her thoughtfulness. He'd only meant for her to get a drink for Finn, and instead she'd considered the entire table of guests. This is why men needed women. Finn shot him a silent, thankful look before downing half his mug of water in one go. For decades my family line has held our land in peace and prosperity without outside assistance. Ivan began, clasping his hands on the table in front of him. We have been stubborn and strong-willed, and back in the years of the Great Dragon Scourge, we fought them. It has taken much time to cut back on our old ways, as I'm sure you remember. We don't kill the beasts anymore, we wish to train them. However, you don't know how. Hiccup finished. Ivan sighed. Exactly. We've heard rumors over the many years of your methods and it's spread through the archipelago, but our attempts have proved unsuccessful. Many people are afraid to try any further, and it has taken much goading from my own council to get the votes to approach you with my request. Hiccup pondered this information. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. All right. Ivan looked at his father, who leaned forward. We would be truly honored if you taught our people how to train dragons. In exchange for your training, we would agree to pay a handsome price and offer you our services in military might. Hiccup smiled knowingly. I've heard rumors of this army of yours. Ivan and Kiev looked pleased. Have you? Kiev asked. You're a secretive people. Hiccup eased forward on crossed arms. But I've heard a few rumors over the years. He smiled at the intrigue on Finn's face. We don't normally allow people into our village, Ivan replied. We have a few traders from distant lands who we've made agreements with, but I must say that Johan has especially proved his loyalty. Johan has been a valuable asset for Berk since even I was a child. Hiccup agreed. Also, my grandfather spoke of his attempts at a treaty. I was pretty young, but I do remember they came back a little worse for wear. Ah. Kiev hung his head in shame, as if that skirmish had been his fault. You can blame our stubbornness for that. Hiccup snorted, sharing a look with Astrid. Oh, we have plenty of that to go around. Finn let out a derisive snort. With a smile, Ivan gestured to his neighboring councilman. He reached into a satchel and withdrew a large bag, which clinked against the table once it was deposited between the haddocks. We would pay you with this for your services. Kiev gestured to Finn. Go ahead and take a look. Finn pulled the string on the bag and whistled appreciatively. Happy birthday to me. The bag was filled to the brim with round, pure gold coins. There's more where that came from, Ivan noted proudly. Really? Hiccup asked, impressed. He inspected a few and passed the handful to Astrid. He smirked at Snotlout's wide-eyed, greedy expression on her other side. Tough Nut looked like he might start drooling on the table. He pressed a handful of coins to his face and inhaled deeply. One reason we have kept to ourselves all these years, our land is flowing with natural resources. Gold, silver, copper, you name it. There are even diamonds in the eastern caves. Combined with our large numbers and strong army, we would be a great asset to your allied clans. However, Ivan paused, drawing out the word. This is actually another reason we've come to ask for aid. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Ivan looked a bit frustrated. A few months ago, Jut was raided. These men plundered our village, attacked some of our people. We fought them off and sent their ships running, but it wasn't until the aftermath that we realized that the fight within the village had been a distraction. Another group of men plundered our storeroom. Kiev picked up the tale. Our resources are vast, so our village is not in any danger of starvation. Our problem, Hiccup, is that these men were riding dragons. Astrid straightened in her seat. Dragon riders were attacking Jut. How many? At least a dozen in the village. Ivan replied. How many times have they attacked since? Hiccup asked. 3 times, sir. Kiev replied. The last attack was not as successful, we tried to track them. They got away with much less gold. But we cannot fight what we cannot control, and since we don't want to harm the beasts anymore, it's hardly an easy position to be in. No, it's smart. Hiccup agreed, thinking quickly. What do these individuals look like? They dress in all black and ride dragons of varying species. We have yet to catch anyone and they fly under no banner that we could see. So do you need help rounding these people up? Or is this part of learning to train dragons so you can do that yourselves? Finn asked. Ivan nodded. The latter. We need to be able to protect our people and our financial system. I'll say. Hiccup leaned forward. I have a question, however. Since you've always been so secretive, with numbers and wealth you could exterminate the dragons in your area without any of us knowing about it. Why now? Ivan's eyes seemed to dull with a tired look that only a fellow chief could understand. We tire of fighting with dragons. We are behind the times and we've only heard of the benefits that have come of it. We admire it, despite our fear. We wish to change our village for the better. All of our traders told us of Burke's success, especially Johann. He wouldn't stop singing your praises. Kiev tittered. Sounds like Johann Astrid knocked Hiccup with an elbow, many others nodding in agreement. At any rate, military might and wealth, those things pass away with time. Kiev added with a wistful smile. But knowledge is everything. And overcoming generations-long enmity. A collective laugh echoed through the room in agreement. Yeah, so I have a question, Snotlout interjected. You wouldn't be the first chief with a strong army to want dragon knowledge. How do we know that once you have that knowledge and add an army of dragons to your disposal that you won't attack us or our allied clans? Luckily we prepared to answer that question, Ivan replied calmly. We wish to sign an agreement with Hiccup, in blood if necessary, that we will not take advantage of his knowledge, and will not use our services to attack allied clans. In joining a union with Burke, we would like to grow this union to the other allied clans. HMPH Snotlout snorted. Good luck with that. Kiev frowned worriedly. How do you mean? Outcast Island isn't particularly too fond of new recruits. Finn remarked with a set expression. Ah, I admit we have heard a thing or two about Outcast Island. Surely this must not come as a surprise, though. It is, after all, an island of outcasts. Outcast Island has grown in the last 20 years. Hiccup twirled a gold coin in his fingers as he spoke. The agriculture has grown. Their numbers have increased, some of them were born and raised to adulthood, so the convicts and outcasts themselves are getting up in age. Ali herself isn't a great person, but she hasn't been a horrible chief. I genuinely think she's made some good decisions for the island. We still banish people to outcast if it's necessary and Ali will accept them, but for the most part the people have begun to flourish. Surely banishments don't happen often though. Hiccup met their eyes levelly. No. But I admit we have had a few recent banishments. From the corner of his eye he saw Heather stiffen in her seat, so he quickly changed the subject. As for an agreement with Burke, I don't see any problem. We would hold you accountable, of course. Of course. It's the rest of the allied clans you'll need to convince, as far as joining the Union. Our aid would go towards any allies in need, of course, not only Burke. That's the problem though. Astrid sat forward in her seat. There have been a few disturbances in the Union in recent years. No attacks have been made outright, but we are still on edge. Ivan frowned. Does this mean the treaty is weak? Growing weaker, if anything. Hiccup ran a hand through his hair. We have a meeting every 10 years or so when we go over the treaty, discuss common issues, but in the years since the last meeting. He bobbed a shoulder. People are getting itchy to grab a weapon. Kiev stroked his beard thoughtfully. People in general or particular leaders? Ali the insincere of Outcast Island is on my watch list. If you make it into the Union, and I'm sure you will, don't trust her. But in the event of joining the Union, Ivan frowned. I could not deny her aid if she requested it. According to the treaty, no, you couldn't. Hiccup sat back in his seat. I tend to skirt the edges of the treaty. I won't risk the safety of my village for someone I don't trust. If you feel you should lead your people in a similar manner, that's all right with me. Sounds mutinous. Ivan frowned. Hiccup shrugged. I tend to do my own thing. That isn't to say that I avoid conflict. Most of the time I'm at the center of conflict. Kamikaze of Bob Burglar Island and Kara the kind of brawn, they'll eagerly accept your proposal. They are Burke's strongest allies. Bob Burglar Island. That's the tribe with only women, isn't it? That's the one. How does that work exactly? At Hiccup's smirk, Ivan shook his head. Ah, you know what? Another topic for another time. Finn snickered in his seat. When is this next meeting? Ivan asked. This coming March, Burke will be the host. The allied clans will meet here for a week. There will be a host of trading and food and entertainment. We'll set up a marketplace in the square. It's more than just political moves. Kiev seemed to brighten. That sounds fun. You'll be in the boring meetings with me, father. Of course, right. Kiev rolled his eyes. I haven't served my time at all. Who says I can't enjoy retirement? Ivan gave a long-suffering sigh and Hiccup suddenly saw himself and Finn in a few years. How long have you been chief, Ivan? Ivan's mouth set into a firm line and he shot his father a frown. 6 months. That explains a few things. Not that you're doing a poor job at all, quite the opposite. Hiccup added quickly. You just remind me of someone, that's all. Finn rolled his eyes heavily, earning a chorus of chuckles from the table. Even Ivan cracked a smile. Anyway, that's all we have to say and offer, sir. Ivan spread his hands. Unless you would like a stronger payment. Well, Kiev's eyes glittered and Hiccup realized he was looking at Finn. My youngest daughter is still single. I could throw her into the price if it made any difference. Finn struggled to keep the horror off his face. He gave a surprised cough and finally managed to reply, that's okay, I'm sure she's got some nice options at home. HMPH. Kiev replied, even as Ivan gave him an irritated scowl. Engaged already? Finn flushed. No. Oh well, in that case. Father. Ivan hissed in horrified embarrassment. I'm kidding. Kiev laughed with a wave of his hand. Most everyone at the table was laughing at Finn and Ivan, who both were giving each other a shared I hate my life expression. Anyway, what do you say, Chief? Kiev asked, returning to the discussion at hand. Hiccup turned to Astrid, who gave him a discreet nod. Making eye contact with all of his council, even Finn, he saw that their vote was unanimous. I think I'd be stupid not to accept your offer. Excellent. Kiev exclaimed, whopping Ivan on the back with a heavy hand. Everyone stood and shook hands in celebration to their agreement. Hiccup found the men very respectful and easygoing, and now they could spread the knowledge of dragon riding to the west. Hiccup dismissed his council to their usual duties, while he and Astrid decided to remain in the Great Hall with the Sullivans. They sat down once again to discuss the finer details of their agreement when Kiev's gaze strayed to Hiccup's left. Are you all right, son? Hiccup and Astrid turned to Finn, whose face had gone pale. He looked like he was struggling to stay awake. Yes, I'm fine. He quickly rubbed the glazed look out of his eyes. Finn, why don't you get some air? Nah, I'm okay. Finn. His son gave him that annoyed, disgruntled look. Hiccup raised his eyebrows in silent argument. He could feel Astrid's steely gaze on his other side. Go home, get some rest, he murmured. Check on Addy for me. Finn sighed long-sufferingly before muttering his agreement. He stood and tried to hide a wince. It was great to meet you both. Likewise, Ivan shook his hand once more as he walked past. Kiev nodded. I hope to meet you again soon, Finn. Hiccup's eyes didn't leave Finn as he left the Great Hall. When he heaved the door open and left the building, he realized Ivan and Kiev were staring at him and his wife silently. He is injured. Ivan commented. Astrid sighed softly. Yes. How did you know? Hiccup asked. We've seen many injuries over the years, Kiev replied calmly. At first I thought he was merely a quiet young man, but as the meeting progressed, I noticed his attention slipping, and not for lack of interest. Hiccup nodded. He's had a rough month. What happened? Kiev asked, then seemed to backtrack. If you don't mind my asking, that is. He met Astrid's eyes, unsure how to reply. They seemed like good men, but they were still fairly new acquaintances. For both Finn and Adriana's sake, he didn't want to divulge too much information. Astrid seemed to read his thoughts. Our daughter, Adriana, was in danger. He tried to help and got stabbed. Both men winced, brows furrowed. When was this? About a month ago, Hiccup sighed, running a hand through his hair. That first week was the worst, but he's a tough kid. He'll be okay. And your daughter? Astrid nodded. She's all right. Oh good, Kiev sighed in relief. Hiccup's heartstrings gave a mighty heave, but he ignored this. If these men were to be their allies, then they'd find out the truth and details eventually, just as would the rest of the archipelago. Well, should we begin the finer points of this new agreement? Astrid asked. A mighty fine idea, madam. Kiev agreed. She chuckled. Please, call me Astrid. Of course. For the next hour they laid the groundwork for their future agreement. In a week's time, Hiccup would fly to Jet with a group of dragon riders. They'd go through a series of lessons with the villagers to teach them the basics of befriending dragons. Hiccup would then assign a team of riders to spend time at Jet for a few weeks to begin fully training the people. By the time they had a complete plan built for the coming months, the Great Hall had begun to fill for the dinner hour. The tables filled with villagers, and at long last, the entire building was abuzz with conversation. You have a rather large village, Hiccup. Grows bigger every year, he nodded in agreement. A pair of blondes caught his attention and he waved them over. Kiev, Ivan, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Adriana. Adriana looked at the pair of men with surprise before a smile lit up her face and she shook their hands. I heard we had some visitors. Welcome to Berk. A pleasure to meet you. Kiev smiled up at her. His dark eyes flitted to Eric, who eagerly shook his hand. Are you Adriana's husband? Eric's grin faltered and he glanced at Hiccup. Oh no, sir. Boyfriend. Kiev and Ivan's smiles stiffened, but they made no further comment. It was obvious that they'd noticed Adriana was pregnant. Hiccup quickly spoke before the situation got more awkward. Eric is apprenticing at our leather shop, he very well might take over for Horst one day. Is that so? Kiev asked with interest. You enjoy leather work? As long as you don't have me stringing beads all day, I enjoy it. Eric joked. Do you make saddles at the leather shop or is that a separate job? Ivan asked with curiosity. Eric nodded. Saddles are our specialty. We make everything from boots to bags to tool belts, but saddles fill up most of our time. The rest is usually seasonal. Ah, that's interesting. You will make yourself a fine living in that profession, young man. Kiev nodded encouragingly. Thanks. Now what do you do in your spare time, Missy? Adriana's hands fiddled in front of her stomach nervously. Hiccup dearly wanted to hold them still to steady her. Well, I usually watch the kids in the village and help keep track of all the records. But I haven't really done that in a while. More free time on your hands. Free time is the best time. Kiev winked. Adriana giggled. I can agree with that. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you. Kiev patted her shoulder and smiled at them both. We'll let you get some food. Thanks. Eric grinned, gently escorting her to a nearby table. Adriana smiled at them as they left, waving quickly at her parents. As soon as they were out of earshot, Hiccup and Astrid leaned closer to them. We should explain, Hiccup began. Kiev shook his hands even as Ivan spoke. No, Hiccup. You don't have to explain anything to us. These things happen. No, please, Astrid interrupted. We would rather you know the details than think ill of our daughter. It wasn't her fault. Both men's uneasy smiles dissolved into confused frowns. What do you mean? Kiev asked quietly. Hiccup hadn't wanted to have this discussion with them so quickly, but admitted to himself that it was necessary. They seemed to be genuinely good people with families of their own. Ivan had already told them about his wife and 3 children waiting for him back on Jet. He didn't want them thinking ill of his only daughter. He sighed heavily. Eric is a good kid, he's her best friend. But he isn't her first boyfriend. Kiev's eyebrows shot up. Oh. This other boy. Astrid faltered. She suddenly looked like she wanted to grab her axe. He took advantage of her. In the worst way. Hiccup said quietly. Ivan and Kiev looked stricken. No. He ran, I assume, to Outcast Island. Hiccup muttered bitterly. Good thing, two-eyed. He shook his head and looked away, watching his daughter toss a roll at Eric. She laughed as it bounced off his nose and rolled under the table. I'm so sorry, Kiev said quietly. You didn't need to tell us. Hiccup realized his eyes were burning and he roughly wiped his face. No, it was necessary. The last thing we want is for people to think that she's done something wrong. She seems like a very sweet girl, Ivan commented quietly. What of the boy who did this? Astrid shook his head. We haven't seen him since he took off. Worst though is we didn't know why he took off. It was a month later when we found out. Goodness. Kiev sighed. He blinked and suddenly leaned forward. This doesn't have anything to do with Finn's injury, does it? Hiccup winced. Yes and no. A few other boys who were friends of Brandine's, that's the other boy, they cornered her and tried to, well. Finn saw what was happening and tackled them. He fell on a knife and I banished them for touching my daughter and nearly killing my son, even if the latter was an accident. Good riddance. Ivan sculled. Why didn't you kill them? Our village hasn't been subject to that kind of brutality in decades, Hiccup said. As much as I wanted to string them up by their necks, I didn't want to scar my village, particularly the younger generation. It would have made a sure example. So did launching them into a boat with holes in the bottom, I'm sure. Astrid smirked at her husband, and he couldn't help but smile back. Gracious, your family has had a rough year. Kiev sighed. I can't imagine my Thuggery or Genevieve going through any of this. Are those your youngest? Astrid asked. They are. Kiev swelled proudly. Thuggery is 19 and Jen is nearly 17. Actually she's held a lot of interest in Burke in recent years. Hiccup laughed. Why is that? Dragons make her nervous, but she's always found your people interesting. Since she was little, she'd ache for the days that Johan would come to visit so she could listen to all of his stories. Ivan snorted. But it was Thug that we barely convinced to stay home. Oh, Thuggery, Kiev sighed. He's the reason I have grey hair. Hiccup and Astrid laughed. Why is that? He never stops talking, Ivan stressed. And I do mean never. Always pranking people and chatting about something or catching bugs and putting them in my wife's cupboards. You'd think he'd mature up a bit. Oh dear, Astrid gave Hiccup a meaningful look. Sounds a bit like somebody we know. Who? Kiev asked. Hiccup pointed over their shoulders at a certain curly-haired boy who was currently frolicking between the tables with a bowl of cookies. A swarm of terrible terrors were dive-bombing him from all sides and they could hear him yelling, "Begone, you fiends! ZE cookies are mine!" Oh my God, Ivan murmured. It's Thuggery's twin. Hiccup raised an eyebrow as Cliff ran up to him, clutching the bowl. Chief. A little help. Cliff, you know how to deal with terrors on your own. Ya gotta help me, man. Do you know the painstaking effort it takes to protect such chocolatey goodness? Cliff. But I must protect the bounty. Kiev, Ivan and Astrid dissolved into snickers. Hiccup did his best to keep a straight face. Cliff, I trained you well. Go forth and do your duty. Chief, that is disgusting and I will forget you ever said that, Cliff remarked flatly. Do you really want to be the one to keep a pregnant woman from her delicious treats? Are they actually for Addie or are you just saying that so you can save the bounty for yourself? Cliff gasped loudly. You dare insinuate that I would take advantage of my precious? Ow. A terror yanked on his hair with extra fervor. Hiccup rolled his eyes and whistled loudly. The terrors squeaked and fluttered around him. Who wants a cod? He quickly snatched up an extra fish from dinner and launched it 30 feet into the air. The terrors snatched and clawed over the piece of meat with relish and Hiccup raised an eyebrow at Cliff. See how easy that was? Cliff pouted. I couldn't let them steal Ma Precious's cookies. Okay, get outta here. Hiccup waved him off to Adriana and Eric's table. Thanks, Chief. Cliff scampered away with his large bowl of cookies and announced his success to his friends, who'd been joined by Helga and Inga. Hiccup vaguely wondered where Tarin was when a hearty laugh brought him back to his table. He is definitely Thugger's twin. Let's agree that we'll never allow them to meet, or else one or both of our villages will burn to the ground. I'll drink to that. Ivan raised his glass. The foursome clinked their large mugs and drank. Hiccup wasn't sure what was in store for the future, but with a smile he couldn't help but feel like a new friendship was blooming. Eric was tired. He'd been in the shop for 6 hours. Of course, most of the time, he didn't mind this. Cliff was more than enough to keep him entertained. But Cliff's mother wasn't feeling well and he had gone to help rid her body of its frightful ailment by keeping her so entertained, she forgets she's sick. Or something like that. He was just thinking about throwing in the towel and telling Horst he would be back tomorrow when a familiar face stuck its head through the window. Charger, he grinned, ducking slightly so that the window pane wouldn't whack him on the head. What are you doing here, buddy? He's with me, came Hiccup's voice from outside. He was leaning against the window with Eric's saddle under an arm. Saddle up. Eric glanced at Horst's office. I should probably. I already checked with him. Hiccup said, tossing the saddle at him. Now let's go. Feeling slightly apprehensive, Eric strapped the saddle onto Charger's back. Within a minute he'd mounted his dragon and took off just behind Hiccup and Toothless. He had no idea where they were going and he didn't feel comfortable asking Hiccup where or why they were flying to who knew where. Although he had a sneaking suspicion that the conversation he'd been dreading would be happening quite soon. Hiccup was silent. Eric watched as Burke shrank away into the distance, thinking wryly that if something were to happen and Hiccup were to snap, his screams would go unheard. But he certainly hadn't given the chief any reason to torture him, had he? He felt rather like he had when his mother called him over as a child. Usually if she wanted his attention, that meant he'd done something wrong. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably nowhere near that long, they touched down on an island Eric had never seen before. It was much smaller than Burke but not unlike it in appearance. Hiccup dismounted and beckoned him over, still not talking. Eric followed wordlessly, although questions popped up in his head rather rapidly. What was Hiccup doing? Why was he being so quiet? Where was this island, anyway? You don't have to look at me like that. Hiccup said rather abruptly, making Eric jump. I thought you might want to see this place. I'm not taking you here to make you disappear. Eric smiled appreciatively. His apprehension must have shown on his face. So, why? Just a little farther, okay. Hiccup beckoned him again and they walked through the trees. A thought occurred to him after a few minutes and Eric couldn't help asking it. Aren't the delegates from Jet still on Burke? No, I offered them a place to stay, but they insisted on traveling through the night. Something about taking advantage of our hospitality after a fine supper. Hiccup chuckled. They seem like very good men, but I think they're on the traditional side. How so? Eric asked, intrigued. Well, in offering a girl to Finn as part of the agreement. Eric choked. They what? He laughed. No way. What did he say? Hiccup shook his head in amusement. He handled it pretty well. Kiev was joking, at least I think he was joking. At any rate, he'll find out soon enough that Finn isn't all that into tradition. Well yeah, you're his dad. Eric laughed again. Hiccup smiled knowingly but stopped suddenly, gesturing outward with an arm. Eric's eyes widened. An enormous waterfall stood in the center of the clearing, the sunlight hitting it at such an angle that he could see little rainbow flakes of water coming off it. He'd seen waterfalls before, of course, but nothing quite like this. The spray of water felt refreshing in the hot sun. Hiccup took Toothless' saddle off and the Night Fury bounded forward. Eric had a split second to cover his eyes before the dragon leaped into the water, splashing water everywhere. Toothless was still a relatively young dragon, something that Eric remembered most clearly at times like this. Hiccup smiled, watching him hop around in the water for a bit before turning to Eric, who was just unhooking Charger's saddle. He waited for Eric to allow Charger to dive into the water before fully turning to face him. Now that you can't escape, I thought we should have a chat. Hiccup said, grinning presumably so that Eric wouldn't automatically think he was doomed. A chat. Hiccup sat down on a rock formation and patted the space next to him. Eric sauntered over and sat next to him. "I think you know what this is about," said Hiccup, the smile finally melting off his face. Eric nodded. "Annie." Hiccup sighed, watching the dragons splashing each other in the water for nearly a minute. "I want you to understand a few things." "Okay." Hiccup faltered for a moment. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Finally he looked Eric in the eye again, an unreadable expression affixed to his face. "First, I want to know what your intentions are with my daughter." Eric considered this for a few seconds. Yes, he and Adriana had discussed the future in passing. But they hadn't thought as hard about it as they probably should. He felt woefully unprepared for this conversation with her father, at any rate. For a second, he considered lying and telling Hiccup that he intended to marry her and raise her baby and live happily ever after. But that seemed a bit drastic, and probably a bit flippant. Finally, he settled on what was, perhaps, a bit of a cop-out. "I don't know exactly." Heart pounding, Eric waited for Hiccup's response. He didn't have to wait very long. "I thought not. It's not that I haven't thought about it, I just..." Hiccup held up a hand. "I understand. I was young once too, as hard as that is to believe." "It's not hard to believe, sir." Eric muttered. "Sir." Hiccup breathed a laugh. "I know this is a weird conversation, but don't feel like you have to be formal." Eric fidgeted. "Yeah, but, well, wouldn't you rather I make a good impression? Despite the fact I've known you your entire life." Hiccup grinned. At Eric's spluttered argument, he waved a hand. "All right then. Anyway, your plans. Have you thought about where you want to be in 5 years? 10 years? Well, yes." Eric said truthfully. "The plan has changed a few times but, well, yeah. I have." "Does Addie factor into it?" Eric smiled. Were the situation any different, he might have been quite embarrassed to reveal the truth. "She always has. Since a couple of years ago, anyway." Eric rubbed his eyes. When he lowered his hands, Hiccup's sharp green eyes were still boring into him like a drill. "I love her." "I know you do, Eric, but loving and spending your life together are two different things. They should go hand in hand in marriage, but you can love someone without marrying them." Hiccup explained, and Eric could tell where the conversation was going. "Do you intend to marry her?" And there it was. The question that had been on Eric's mind since he'd found out Adriana was pregnant. Truth be told, he still wasn't completely sure. Did he want to spend the rest of his life with her? He was only 18 years old. That seemed extremely young to be making gigantic, life-altering decisions. And 17 was even younger. Sure, they might want to spend their lives together now. But in 10 years? In 20 years? Heck, in 1 year they would have a baby to care for. It was a lot to think about, and Eric wasn't thrilled at the prospect of being forced by circumstance to get married so young. At the same time, it was Annie. The girl he'd loved his entire life, both platonically and romantically. The first and best friend he'd ever made. The girl who made his heart pound whenever he looked at her. He knew he loved her, genuinely loved her, but was that enough? "Take your time," Hiccup prompted. "I'm in no hurry. It's a lot to think about." "I know," Hiccup said, leaning back slightly as he watched their dragons play. Eric rubbed his sweaty palms on his knees. "I have thought about it a lot. I don't know, Chief, I mean. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm only 18 and, it's honestly scary to make this kind of decision." "I know. And she's going to have a baby. The last thing I want to do is make her situation worse or jerk her around." "I know, that's why we are having this discussion." Eric stood, feeling the need to pace. He could feel Hiccup's gaze on his back. "So what are you saying I should do?" "I'm not going to tell you what to do, Eric," Hiccup replied. "I want you to make a decision." Eric opened his mouth to argue and the chief held up a hand. "Listen for a second. I understand completely. Do you know how long Astrid and I dated before I finally made a decision? Eric rubbed the back of his head. No. It was a long time. Granted, we were teenagers and we were involved in all sorts of stuff. Hiccup rolled his eyes. Anyway, by the time we were 20 we'd been together for years. She knew she wanted to marry me, but what was I doing? I was off adventuring and making maps and tooling around the archipelago with Toothless. It took some time, but I finally realized that I had to make a decision. Getting over my wanderlust wasn't going to come overnight. If I wasn't willing to put aside my insecurities or hobbies for her, then why were we even dating? Hiccup's eyes bored into Eric's. Do you understand what I'm saying? Eric nodded. Yes. I understand what you're feeling completely. It's a different situation and more hinges on you and Addie, especially concerning the baby. But she's already devoted to you, Eric. That should scare you a bit. Eric nodded again. It does. Because if something happens. He sighed. I don't want to be the next guy to break her heart. That's what I'm afraid of, Eric. Hiccup said calmly. I don't mean to put pressure on you and force you to make a decision right this second. But I want you to understand that if I give you my blessing and you tear her apart, I'm afraid there won't be anything left. She won't give another man a chance. Eric's mouth was dry. It was a terrifying thing to consider. So Hiccup said in a bit calmer tone. Considering how much you care about her, I can see this working. Arguments happen in marriage, you offend each other, and you both have to learn to accept that you're wrong sometimes and be humble enough to apologize and ask forgiveness. You and Addie have already had to do that before in your relationship, which is good. In a way, you've already gotten a head start. Eric gave him a wan smile and sat down once again. It wouldn't be easy with a baby though. It's not. You're talking to the man whose life changed from single to married with 2 children in less than a year. Hiccup's eyebrows disappeared into his hairline and Eric laughed. Addie's resilient. I know she can get through anything. The way she fails and then gets back up and tries again, I admire that. I think she got it from both Astrid and me. She has gone through things that I could never have imagined. Would never have wanted. Hiccup paused and Eric waited patiently, knowing he had more to say. In February Hiccup continued, his voice much softer. You might be put in the same position I was 17 years ago. Holding your newborn daughter and feeling things you never thought you could feel for another person erupting through you. And the most horrible things will pop into your head. What if someone takes her away? What if someone hurts her? She's so precious that these sorts of things are your worst nightmare. The sorts of things that make your blood run cold at night when you're drifting off to sleep. And, with the exception of her dying, all of those things have happened. Eric felt a tightness in his chest. He hated that about this past year. Or maybe the past 17 years. Adriana had endured far more pain than she should have, than anyone should have. There had always been a distinct difference between her and Finn, even since they were small. Finn had blundered into the painful situations. Adriana had been victimized. She hadn't asked for any of it. And yet she had stayed strong. Sure, she cried a few tears over it, she let herself feel the pain, but then she got up and kept on going. It was something he'd always admired about her. She doesn't let that stop her. Eric said after a few seconds' tense silence. She never has. No, she doesn't. Hiccup agreed. But that doesn't mean she deserves to have it happen again. And that's why I need something from you before I give you my full blessing. Eric swallowed hard against the tension rolling in his stomach, even though he already knew what was coming. Barring any extreme circumstances that can't be foreseen now, I need to know with confidence that you plan on marrying her. If you think about it tonight and realize that you don't think you can do it, I want you to end it tomorrow. Hiccup's green eyes pierced his. It felt like Eric's heart was in his throat. It would hurt her, but it's soon enough that I think she'd be okay with time. I don't want that to happen. I would be thrilled if this worked out. But I won't have her heart broken again, especially not by you. It isn't fair to her or her baby. The last thing she needs is to have this baby in a few months and you come to realize that your heart isn't in it. Eric considered it for a few moments, but the words resonated in his head. It was okay to be afraid, to have insecurities. If anybody deserved to have insecurities right now, it was Adriana, and she trusted him. She needed him, and one day the baby would need a father. He didn't know how to be a husband or a father, but no man did without prior experience. He loved Adriana, and even though he didn't have any biological ties to her child, he'd already grown attached to it. He didn't just want to know his best friend's baby one day. He wanted to be there when it took its first breath. I will. Eric didn't know where the confidence came from, but he knew by the rush of determination in his chest that it was real. I want to be here for both of them. I won't leave her. You realize I am begging you not to break my daughter's heart? Yes. Eric nodded. I won't fail you. That's not to say I won't probably screw up sometimes. But I'm not going anywhere. Hiccup stared at him with an unreadable expression for a few seconds before putting an arm around his shoulders. Welcome to the family. Eric couldn't help the grin that split his face. He honestly hadn't felt this light-hearted in a long time. He'd been dreading this conversation for so long. Now he felt like he could run a mile. Thanks. You know, if you hurt her, I'll kill you. Not if I kill me first. Very funny. The men laughed and watched their dragons play. For the first time since Adriana had told him she was pregnant, Eric looked over at Hiccup without a hint of trepidation, and realized that he was probably looking at his future father-in-law. Eric touched down to Burke at dusk. He was tired from the long flight back but eager to find his girlfriend. He gave Charger a hearty scratch under the chin before waving him toward the hangar and bidding him good night. Pushing through the crowd, he finally spotted Adriana walking down the street, apparently lost in thought. A few months ago, he would have hurried up behind her and put his hands over her eyes and whispered, "Guess who?" Now he knew that such an action would likely give her a panic attack. Instead he jogged down the street after her, his hurried steps catching her attention. Seeing her face light up made him smile so much, he could feel the dimples on his face. "Hi," she said breathlessly, stopping so he could catch up. Her fingers slipped into his almost instantly. "Hey." Eric nudged her side. "What's up?" "I was finger painting with Ava today and then she decided to see if she could feel the baby kick." Adriana opened her light jacket to reveal a small, green handprint on her belly. "Well, did she?" Eric asked, grin widening at the amusing mental image. "She says she did." Adriana shrugged. "Pretty impressive since I haven't felt anything yet." "Well, I think green suits you. We should make that the color of the nursery," Eric said. "We?" Eric felt heat rise to his face. I meant. No, don't fix it." Adriana squeezed his hand. "I like that you said we." He gave her a giddy smile and swung their hands between them. He felt like a love-struck fool. "What are you grinning about?" Adriana asked. "Nothing. Nobody smiles like that over nothing." She pressed into his shoulder, looking up at him with big green eyes. "Tell me all your secrets, Mr. Larson." His heart leaped and looking away, he sighed heavily. "Don't do that. You should not have told me about it then." Adriana laughed. "I had to because you wouldn't stop saying it. It's not my fault." Eric rolled his eyes. "She had him there." "How's Finn?" Adriana's expression shifted. "Tired. He was changing his bandages when I left. The wound is all dark and red and bleh." She shuddered. "I feel really bad." "Don't feel bad," Eric replied firmly. "He was protecting you." He slid an arm around her waist and kissed her forehead chastely. "I wish I was strong enough to protect myself for once." Adriana mumbled. Eric thought about this. "Well, maybe one day you can." "What do you mean?" "Well, I heard your dad say a few days ago that he'd like our age group to start training more. Knowing how to fly our dragons is great, but when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, we're slacking." Adriana summed up. "Basically." Eric stopped and removed a pebble stuck in his prosthetic, using Adriana's shoulder for support. "I wonder if the new allies would be willing to help with that." Adriana raised an eyebrow. "Training our people? We have plenty of people who know how to fight." "Yes, but I've actually read about Jut. Eric smirked at her pout. Yes, there were some books he'd read without her knowledge. There's a whole section on their army. After the initial settling wars and the Vikings chose their lands, Jut built up their army to decimate anyone who'd try to pick a fight. It was rumored that their island was pretty wealthy. Finn said they were paying us in gold. Adriana agreed. You just found this book in the records. Eric tapped the side of his nose. Something like that. I want to read it. Okay, I'll give it to you tomorrow. He grinned down at her, his stomach tying in knots. The sunset above them was giving her green eyes an almost mysterious look. He didn't know if it was the atmosphere or his talk with Hiccup, but he couldn't help but think she was looking radiant tonight. Adriana made a face and shook her head. What? Nothing. You keep staring at me. Is that such a crime? Eric grinned. You're just acting weird. Adriana poked his ribs, making him jump away. You never give me doofy smiles. Eric snorted. Doofy smiles. Yes, doofy smiles. Adriana looked around even as he still looked at her, though he tried to be more discreet. Her hair was pulled back into a low tail this evening. She'd probably pulled it back when babysitting Ava. Her bangs had gotten longer recently, skirting the edge of her cheekbones. It probably annoyed her, judging by how much she pushed them out of her eyes. The best part though was her little baby bump poking out of the edge of her jacket. Eric tried to hide the massive grin that took over his face and Adriana huffed. All right, that's it. What hey? Adriana had grabbed his arm and tugged him into a side street. Before he quite knew what was happening, his back was to a wall and Adriana's mouth was on his. Eric sighed and rested his hands on her waist, kissing her back with just as much fervor. Adriana tugged on the short ends of his hair, pulling him closer even as she pressed her body farther into his. Eric slid his hands up her sides and Adriana moaned, pulling away softly. He'd never before been so daring, but he kissed along her jaw to the soft patch of skin beneath her ear, and suddenly she was panting in his ear. Eric. Sure, it's okay. He straightened, holding her face gently in his hands. He kissed her again, turning them so her back was against the wall. He gasped when Adriana nipped his lip and she gave him a mischievous smile before he was kissing her again. She was everything to him. Eric resolved that afternoon that she would be a part of his future and he would be a part of hers, and they were going to raise her baby together. It wouldn't be just her baby then, it would be theirs. It would be hard and scary, but it would be an adventure with her. Little had he known what his future held that day he'd given the scared little girl a hand-drawn picture in the hopes of making her happy. Now, years and years later, little did she know just how happy she made him every day, despite her flaws and struggles and fears. Adriana pulled away from his mouth, breathing hard, her hands still deep in his hair. Eric realized he too was panting. Phew. Adriana laughed, dropping her forehead onto his collarbone. Eric laughed too, kissing the top of her head. Hey, this was all your fault. Oh no. Adriana glared up at him with those beautiful green eyes. You were the one who wouldn't quit looking at me like that. Like what? Eric blinked, honestly confused. Like you wanted to pull me down here yourself. Adriana exclaimed. No, Eric laughed a little. No, I mean maybe, but I wasn't thinking about that. Then what, pray tell, were you thinking about that was so amusing? Thinking about us is amusing now? Eric asked. Adriana smoothed her hands across his chest, whether to smooth out any wrinkles or divert his attention he wasn't sure. Why were you thinking about us? I'm always thinking about us, he replied truthfully. She poked him in the chest. Stop. No, really. I'm always thinking about us. Eric paused. All three of us. Adriana looked up at him in surprise. And there it was, a spark of unsurety in her eyes. Annie. Eric rested his hands on her shoulders and slid them down her arms. His heart was pounding and he wasn't sure why exactly. I'm not going anywhere. Her forehead creased in confusion. I know that. No, Annie. Eric paused, gathering his thoughts. I want to be here with you every step of the way. It's more than just being your friend, more than your boyfriend even. Gods, what was he saying? She seemed to be thinking the same thing. Then amusement stole over her face and she grinned up at him. Are you trying to propose in a deep, dark alley? Eric flushed. No. Hardly a romantic place for such a thing, she teased. Would you just hush so I can get this out? Eric sighed, half amused. This is important. Adriana gave him an amused leaning back against the wall. Ignoring her goofiness, he tried to gather his thoughts again. He met her eyes and realized she was glowing. It hadn't been the sunset or his stimulated emotions. Gazing down at her slightly distended belly, he rested a gentle hand on her waist. I talked to your dad today. Eric met her eyes again and he saw her amusement had disappeared. We talked about the future. What my plans are. Adriana swallowed. Okay. He could hear that small amount of unease in her voice. He wanted to know my intentions. At first I was really afraid to talk to him about it, but I'm glad he did. Because now I'm confident with my answer. Eric rested his other hand on her waist and stepped closer. Annie, I don't want to just be your best friend anymore. I want to build a house for us. I want to wake up next to you every day. I want to help you raise this baby even though I don't have the faintest idea what I'm doing. Adriana laughed softly, reaching up to swipe under her eyes. Me neither. I know, Eric said softly, wiping her cheeks with a thumb. I can't promise that I won't hurt you sometimes because I can't be perfect. But I can promise you that I won't leave you, or your baby. I want to be there every step of the way, right next to you. Eric sighed self-consciously. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I want to marry you someday, Annie. I love you and I don't want you to ever think that one day I'm going to get tired of you or wish that I had moved on. You're the girl I want and together, I think we can make this work. All three of us. Wiping her face again, Adriana tittered. So it kinda was a proposal in a sense. Eric sighed and Adriana laughed harder. Yes but no. I'll come up with something nicer. A little less spontaneous. Adriana pulled him closer for a warm, slightly wet kiss from her tears. I'd like that. Her eyes lit up once again. Then I can call you Mr. Larson every day. Oh gods, woman. Eric sighed. Grinning, Adriana took his hand and he watched in surprise as she rested his palm on her stomach, right over the bump. Eric felt some wave of emotion take over him that he couldn't place. Perhaps it was protection, he wasn't sure if he could call it love just yet. Maybe, just maybe, it was possession. Adriana pressed her hand over top his and he looked at her. She was smiling at him in a way he couldn't name. Leaning forward, he kissed her with as much devotion as he could muster, his hand still on her distended belly. Chapter 23, Trustworthy. Chapter text. Finn hated his body. As the close of August quickly approached, he still wasn't fully healed and thus, he was left to watch the fun and games play out from a distance. Nothing was more agonizing than watching his friends swim while all he could do was sit on his rump all day. The summer was drawing to a close faster than the young adults could blink. Therefore, they'd quickly organized an end of the summer swim party. Finn had worn swimming shorts and a loose shirt to the beach, trailing a ways behind his friends while they tore down the docks to the ocean front. But with his side still tender and his seemingly constant lack of energy, he'd found himself sitting in the sand a few yards back from the water's edge. Zap had taken off halfway to the beach, chasing after Cliff with her tongue lolling past her teeth. Cliff had leapt off the docks with a screech of glee before dousing half the group in a large wave. Pretty soon the other teens had joined him in the water, leaving Finn to sit in the sand and soak up the sun. With a sigh, he turned his face upward into the sun. His skin would probably burn and freckle worse than it already was, but he didn't care. If he couldn't partake in the activities, at least he could look the part. A girl's screech caught his attention. He looked up in time to see Alton dragging her off the docks. Her head went under and when she came up spluttering, she dunked Alton under with both hands. Eric and Adriana were sitting side by side at the end of the docks, kicking their feet back and forth in the water. Finn wondered if Eric had taken off his prosthetic. He seemed to be a little more self-conscious about his stump than Hiccup. Helga was on Thorin's shoulders as he waded through the waters. She was pointing toward the open ocean and daring him to go out as far as he could before they both sank. Morgan and Evan were standing in the water side by side, watching them go, the latter shaking his head in disbelief. From her perch on the docks, Tarin was laughing at Alton and Inga, who were having a splash fight with Cliff and Zap. The shockjaw plunged underneath the waves, barely giving Cliff time to take a deep breath before disappearing completely. Finn had discovered that swimming with Zap could be extra fun, but you had to pay attention. He'd learned the hard way their first summer together that the shockjaw liked to take to the depths in sudden spurts, and if you weren't careful, you could easily drown. He'd had to teach her pretty quickly that people couldn't hold their breath as long as she could. Luckily the incident hadn't happened again. As if on cue, Zap emerged from the water in a flash, going so far as to leap 10 feet into the air. Cliff apparently thought it a wise idea to leap off in that instant. He plunged to the water and Finn heard him yell, "Cannonball," even from that distance. The resulting tidal wave caused by Cliff and Zap's combined splash engulfed the entire docks, dousing Eric, Adriana and Tarin. Thorin lost his balance, pitching headfirst into the waves and losing Helga. Surprisingly, Evan kept Morgan on her feet when the waves engulfed them. Finn snorted at the girl's high-pitched squealing when Cliff's curly head broke the surface. Finn thought for sure his friend was grinning roguishly, despite all the girls' scolding. For not having any siblings of his own, Cliff was definitely everybody else's annoying little brother. If Finn had the energy, he could join them on the docks. At least get a little wet, splash the girls, shove Eric in from behind. But that would require getting up out of the sand, which would require conscientious movements without his side hurting, and he simply didn't have the motivation to deal with it right now. It was becoming a nuisance and he'd never hated moving around so much. With a huff, Finn tossed his towel behind him and lay down, the heat of the sand momentarily scorching his back. He stared up at the blue, cloudless sky and wondered how long it would take for his body to go back to normal. It had been more than a month since Kale had stabbed him and he still wasn't better. Mara kept insisting he was on the mend, but how long did it have to take? His friends cackling and the ocean waves hitting the shore blurred in the background, and after a while of staring into the open skies, he could feel his consciousness slipping. Almost against his will, his eyes slipped to a close and he felt himself dozing off. Hey! Finn jerked awake and instantly regretted it. The usual throbbing in his side made itself known once again and he ignored the impulse to press a hand to his ribs. Gingerly he sat up to see Inga jogging toward him, dark hair dripping. "Oh, were you asleep?" Inga asked with a slight wince. "I don't sleep, I meditate." "Oh really?" Inga flopped down beside him. She wrung out her hair with both hands and a few drops flew onto his bare skin. "Does somebody with such a big head know how to think? Your rudeness truly knows no bounds." "Nope." Inga grinned. "Also, you're red as a lobster." "Ah really?" Finn scrunched his face, feeling the crispness of his skin. "Yeah, he definitely got burned. Mara will be so pleased." Inga rolled her eyes. "You've been cooped up inside too much. You need the fresh air." The firm caring in her voice always surprised him. Inga could be brash and blunt, just like him, but sometimes she had a softer side. He wasn't sure if it was his recovery or simply him that brought it out. Inga pulled multiple handfuls of sand over her legs. Finn watched as she began to bury her lower half and snorted. "We buried my dad once when we were little. Yeah. It was really fun until we lost his prosthetic." Inga's blue eyes widened. "No. Yes." Finn chuckled. "I assume you found it." "Eventually." Inga laughed, drawing pictures in the sand with her finger. A scream caught their attention and they looked up in time to see Cliff pulling Tarin towards the edge of the water. He kept a firm grip on her wrists and fell backwards, dragging her with him. Tarin screamed as she sank below the waves, the other kids laughing as she scrambled back toward the docks. Cliff swam toward her and Finn dearly wished he heard what had been said, because Tarin shoved him back into the waves before marching off the docks with a turned-up nose. Eric and Adriana were cackling, calling Tarin to come back, but she'd already walked into the sand toward Finn and Inga. "What did he say?" Finn asked. Tarin huffed. "He told me to not be so crabby." "Well, he's got a point." Inga mused. "No, that's not." Tarin broke off with a sigh. She sat down on Finn's other side and straightened her bathing suit. "It's an inside joke." Finn didn't know Cliff and Taryn had any inside jokes. In fact, he hadn't seen them talk for a few weeks now. Eric had filled him in on Mr. Brown's ban, and it was only thanks to Alton that she'd been allowed to come to the beach today. Finn's dad drove him up the wall sometimes, but he couldn't imagine either of his parents being that overbearing. But by the way they constantly stole glances at each other, however, Finn knew just as well as anyone that Cliff and Taryn liked each other. If only the Brands would give them a chance. Taryn met his eye and he gave her a small smile. She smiled back before her eyes strayed to his other side, toward Inga. She nodded her head in that direction, her smile widening. Finn glanced in Inga's direction but focused on the water instead, ignoring Taryn's hint. In truth, he didn't know how he felt about Inga. Sure, he enjoyed hanging out with her a lot and she was really fun to talk to, but he still had some insecurities. Being in the healers for so long and having her present for all his medical needs certainly hadn't helped at all. "Will you help with the harvest?" Taryn asked brightly. Finn frowned. "I hope so. I've helped with the harvest since I was 5. "I'm sure you'll be there when it starts," Inga said. "It won't start for another month." "Maybe. When is your dad leaving for Jet?" "Tomorrow." Finn frowned, trying to hide his bitterness. "I wish I could go." "You will soon," Inga said. Indignation flared in his chest and he held back a retort. He was getting really tired of people telling him he'd get there, he'd be healed up soon. He'd been doing nothing but resting the last month and a half and it wasn't getting him anywhere. He wanted to participate in things now. "I know that look." Finn closed his eyes in annoyance. "Inga, not now. You're still healing." "Inga, I know." Taryn held out a hand. "Okay, guys." Finn exhaled heavily, staring up at the sky once again. He waited for his pulse to slow once again before speaking. "This is the most frustrating thing I've ever had to go through. I don't need reminding of what's going on." Inga scowled. "I'm just trying to help." "Well, sorry," Finn sighed, carefully rocking to his feet and standing. "But it's not." He left the girls sitting in the sand and walked toward the docks, ready for new company. He didn't want to take out his frustration on Inga, but he'd been hearing the same advice for the last 5 weeks from his parents, Mara, the councilman, even some of the elderly in the village who felt the need to give him their 2 cents on rehabilitation. He didn't need the lecture from his friends, too, not when the point of coming out here was to relax. Adriana smiled when he sat down on her other side and plunged his feet into the water. He sighed heavily, hoping he didn't look as tired as he felt. "Want to get in?" Eric asked. "No, but you get bra points for trying." "Sweet, I always wanted extra bra points." Eric smiled widely. "Also, what are bra points?" "Points twixt the brothers, brah." "Obviously." Cliff swam toward them, nearly spraying Adriana with water. "Obviously," Eric replied sarcastically. "I wasn't aware we were keeping score." "Ah, hello, brothers always keep score," Finn chided. Cliff lifted himself out of the water and sat down on Finn's other side. "Yeah, where've you been?" Eric rolled his eyes. "I'll never understand you guys." "Well, maybe if you pulled your head out of the clouds for once," Finn began. "Don't make me shove you in, Finn," Eric warned. "Don't shove him in," Adriana interjected. "Otherwise I'll get super wet." Finn pouted. "Why is everyone being so rude today?" Cliff patted his knee gently. "Go easy on baby Finny here, he's having a rough time." Finn planted his hand on Cliff's chest and shoved him into the water. Eric and Adriana laughed, dodging the spray of water. The action made his side twinge in pain, but again he ignored it, instead smirking at the sputtering curly top below. "I'm still stronger than you, noodle." "Hey, I'm not a noodle. I'm a lean machine." Eric laughed out loud. "Which explains why you're so easy to shove off the dock." Cliff raised an arm to splash the trio, but Adriana flung out her hands. "No." He lowered his hand back into the water with wide eyes before slowly floating away. Finn looked over at his sister, who was wearing mid-thigh-length shorts and a tank top. Astrid had tried to find her a bathing suit for the afternoon, but finally she'd settled on a lightweight outfit. Her distended belly was clearly visible beneath the tank top, and more than once, Finn found Eric glancing down at it. Adriana had been consistently happier in the past few weeks. Finn didn't really know why, if it was hormones or what, but it seemed that Eric was also in a greater mood. When he asked what was so exciting, Eric had merely murmured something about the future. Finn had decided from that point on that he didn't want to know what was going on in his friend's head until it was general knowledge. Cliff suddenly yelped when a blue-green mass emerged from beneath him, lifting the teen clear out of the water. Finn's eyes widened and he flung out an arm over Adriana. Zap, no. The shock jaw shook violently in the water, sending Cliff toppling off her back and a large spray of water across the dock. Adriana yelped, both boys trying to shield her, but soon even her hair was damp from the sudden onslaught. Zawap. Adriana frowned, wiping down her arms. I was trying not to get wet, you big doofus. The water rippled with Zap's sad moan as tucked her body beneath the waves so only her eyes poked out. The teenagers snickered, even Adriana, whose mild frustration had quickly evaporated. Why didn't you want to get wet, anyway? Finn asked. Because my clothes will get all stiff and itchy. Ah. Eric pulled his legs out of the water and stood, shaking off his prosthetic. Apparently he hadn't taken it off after all. Want to take a walk? Adriana smiled up at him brightly. Sure. She took his hand and Finn braced a hand on her back as Eric helped her up. He watched them walk down the wet wooden planks, perhaps a bit nervously. Eric only had one foot and she was pregnant, if either of them slipped. His worry was short-lived, however, when they stepped onto the sand and began to stroll hand in hand through the surf. So Cliff hoisted himself out of the water once again, this time careful to keep his distance from Finn's long reach. Is Uncle Finn excited? A small laugh escaped him. I don't think Uncle Finn has really registered what's going on just yet. Man, this kid is going to have the time of her life. Cliff stretched out on the planks with a satisfied smile. Finn didn't fail to notice the chosen pronoun. Uncle Finn, Uncle Cliff, Aunties Inga and Taryn. We'll be the best co-parents ever. Finn rolled his eyes. Great. I'll call you when the diapers need changing. Cliff's smile disappeared. Please don't. Taryn, then. Finn watched his friend's shoulders stiffen and he couldn't resist the question. What's going on with you two? You've been dancing around each other for weeks. I can't talk to her. Brand is a hard case for sure, but once he finds out you mean no harm. It's not about me, it's Taryn. Cliff threw an arm over his eyes. Mr. Brand doesn't trust me, but worse than that, I'm not so sure he even trusts Taryn. As if she'd do anything wrong on purpose. Exactly, Finn agreed. He'll see soon enough that she's the most trustworthy person in our age group. If anything, all this constant protection is hurting her. Cliff only sighed in response. Finn honestly hated seeing his friend so morose. Why don't you go talk to him? Why don't you go talk to Snotlout? Finn winced. Tush. Cliff sat up with an eager smirk. So what's going on there? Nothing. Well yeah, I knew that part. Finn laughed. Cliff wasn't honestly smarter than people gave him credit for. I don't know, man. The last relationship I was in didn't end well. Helga forgave you, Finn. You don't have to hold back because of that. Finn swallowed hard. He forgot sometimes that nobody except his parents knew about Rain. I just don't want to do anything stupid. How is giving Inga a chance stupid? Cliff asked calmly. Giving her a chance isn't stupid, but she is only 13. And I'm not. Cliff bobbed his head in admission. All right, that's a valid reason. But still, it could happen. It could. Do you like her? I've always liked Inga. Cliff's eyes narrowed. Liked Inga, or liked as a friend? Well, it's kinda hard to say since we've known each other since she was born. We used to have play dates when we were toddlers. She's always been there. Yeah, but do you like her? She's fun to talk to and hang out with. Dude, she's a Georgianson. Cliff laughed a little impatiently. Everybody likes hanging out with them. Have you ever spent time with the twins? Vidar is my apprentice, you moron. Exactly. But you still haven't answered my question. Cliff insisted. Do you like her? Finn swallowed, unsure how to answer, as if admitting one way or the other would solidify his answer for good. Well, in that case, Cliff rolled his eyes. Huh. Well, if you can't admit it to me, your bestest bra after Eric, then you certainly shouldn't say anything to Inga. True, Finn admitted, but smirked back. Says the guy who has yet to talk to Taryn. I'm not talking to Taryn until I get Mr. Brand off my back. That settles it then. Finn faced Cliff fully. If you talk to Mr. Brand, then I will talk to Inga. Cliff's brow furrowed in thought. Finn could see the wheels turning behind those steely grey eyes. Deal. The boys shook on it and faced the ocean once again. Finn couldn't help but feel a rush of competitiveness, the first he'd felt in weeks. He knew that was probably nothing compared to what Cliff was feeling, who now had to talk to Mr. Brand about Taryn. Despite this, Finn couldn't resist the urge to shove Cliff back into the water before standing and walking back up the beach. Astrid watched as Finn walked down the docks toward the white sand. Inga and Taryn brushed themselves off and waited for him to catch up before the trio made their way down the beach. Helga and Evan were currently burying Thorin in the sand, carving his body to look like a mermaid. She stifled a smile when she saw they'd even made a bra out of large seashells. Flapping wings sent a few gusts of air toward her, and she waited patiently for her husband to dismount and join her at the fence. Toothless bounded down the decline to join the teenagers and Zack playing in the sand. Hiccup peered over the edge and took in the scene, laughing and shaking his head at Thorin's new look. His mother will be so proud. Astrid scoffed. My son better not get any ideas. It was Hiccup's turn to scoff. Finn would never. He paused, watching as the boy in question tossed his towel onto Thorin's face. Did he swim? No. Hiccup surveyed her pensive expression. He's getting there. No, Hiccup, he's not. Astrid huffed impatiently. He's never been this inactive. It takes weeks for the body to heal from blood loss, Astrid. It's been almost a month and a half. Hiccup exhaled, hands spread out before him. You can't rush these things, Astrid. I know you're as eager for things to go back to normal as he is, but if he doesn't have the energy, then we can't force it. Astrid slumped, dropping her head onto her forearms. He just looks so miserable. Not right now, he doesn't. He looks like he's enjoying the sun with his friends. Probably a little too much if that sunburn is any indication. With a slight eye roll, Astrid sat up and looked down at the young people once again. Adriana was walking in the surf with Eric a little ways down the beach. Her expression softened. Yes, her children were indeed enjoying their day out in the sun. She really shouldn't worry so much. She laughed and Hiccup gave her a confused look. What? Oh, just to think once upon a time I didn't want children. Astrid rolled her eyes. Now all I do is worry about them. Hiccup gave her a wan smile and slid a hand around her waist. That's what good mothers do. Astrid hummed, leaning into his shoulder. When do you plan on leaving? Early. I assume you've packed everything you need. I'll be back tomorrow night, Astrid. I don't need to take much. One can never leave home without an extra pair of underwear. Astrid. Hiccup leaned away with a horrified expression. She chuckled good-naturedly. I'm kidding. I mean, if we're talking about gobber, sure. Astrid elbowed him in the ribs. Leave the old man alone. What? You started it. Oh, shut up, haddock. Astrid pressed a warm kiss to his lips, cutting off his argument. She lingered, sliding her lips softly over his. When she pulled back, he leaned forward to follow, but she'd already turned and walked away. Come on, handsome, let's get your saddlebags packed. Hiccup's smirk sent a thrill through her stomach. Lucky for me, they're already packed. Good gracious, whatever shall we do with all this free time? Astrid mused. The roguish smile on her husband's face was all the answer she needed. Despite his preference for sleeping in, Hiccup always enjoyed early mornings on Burke. After he hauled himself out of bed, strapped his bags to Toothless' saddle and met his chosen companions for the trip, he was wide awake. The pre-dawn sky was tinted in lavender, a few puffy clouds floating past his humble island. There was a gentle yet chilly wind toward the west that signaled the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. Hiccup smiled. They might make the flight in less than 3 hours if the wind was strong. Even at this hour, Rough Nut and Tough Nut were already going at it, fists and feet flying. Hiccup easily sidestepped them and strode toward Snotlout, who seemed to be bickering heatedly with Fish Legs. "Pretty sure your petunias will survive the day." "They're not petunias, Snotlout." Fish Legs scowled, hands on his hips. "They're saffron crocuses. They are very expensive flowers and we use their yellow stamen to create the spice saffron, which... blah blah blah, I think my ears are starting to bleed." Snotlout waved a meaty hand. "We've got more important things to do." Actually, Snotlout, Fishleg's saffron supply is one of his most valuable trading items. Hiccup replied as he walked past. "Johann knows some men who will pay a pretty penny for even a small vial." Snotlout rolled his eyes. "That's great and all, but we'll be back by tonight. I'm pretty sure his little plants will survive the day." "Do you have 7 children, Snotlout?" Hiccup chortled. He could barely handle 2, he wasn't sure how any of his friends kept their homes from burning to the ground. "I have twin sons." "What's your excuse?" "All right, is everyone here?" Hiccup asked, cutting off the mild dispute. They had a long journey ahead and needed everyone to focus. He surveyed the group, which included Horst, Phlegma the Fierce, and Spitaloot, all with their respective dragons. To Fish Legs, he asked about his children if both he and Rough Nut were going. "Heather and Svaler are teaming up to watch all the children," Fish Legs replied. "I believe Astrid and Adriana both agreed to help if need be." A spark of indignation flared in Hiccup's chest, irritated that his daughter planned to do anything other than rest. He stamped out his overprotective feelings and nodded. "Good. Everyone is accounted for. All right, let's saddle up." Toothless wiggled in excitement, eager for the long flight. It didn't happen often that they went on long trips, and while the chief tried his best to take his friend out for a while, it just wasn't the same. Sometimes Hiccup wondered if he should break out the old, self-sufficient tale he'd built years ago. The troop lifted into the sky, following after the leading pair of Burke. The wind was stronger higher up and Toothless roared happily, pumping his wings harder in the updraft. When Burke was a small dot on the horizon, Hiccup glanced back at it once before leaning forward and snapping Toothless' tail into position, allowing the group to take off at a faster rate. Once they were on their way, the banter seemed to pick back up. Rough and Tough's shenanigans weren't much of a surprise, nor were Hiccup's short quips that made the Jorgensens' eyes roll. "Your snooky witticism will be the death of me," Snotlout muttered. "Whoa ho ho, using big words." Tough Nut grinned. "How many brain cells do you think he used coming up with that one?" Rough Nut asked with an impish grin. "Well, considering he didn't have much to begin with." "Hey!" Snotlout shouted over their guffaws. "Just because you're chief doesn't mean you have the right to be cruel. Aren't you always teaching your sons to be cruel?" The Jorgensen snorted. "Dustin would sooner watch butterflies' wings dry than succumb to violence. And Vidar idolizes your son, so what does that tell you? That he has good taste. Haddocks are a horrible influence. Finn has taught him a lot of things. As long as he doesn't teach my son how to preen, I don't care." Hiccup winced as the others laughed. Finn was his mother's son after all. "I never thought that my son would love attention more than my daughter." "What's that supposed to mean?" Rough Nut perked out of her saddle, Buff's head swiveling his direction. "I don't mean that as a bad thing, but don't girls typically love attention? I mean if your wife was here, she'd knock you right out of your saddle." "Yeah, she would. Lucky for you, you get to live another day." "Amy. Hey guys, who wants to play I Spy?" "Tough Nut, we're in the middle of the ocean." Fish Legs replied calmly. "Exactly, it's I Spy for professionals." Tough Nut explained, waving a hand dramatically toward the ocean. "You have to spy the correct wave that is being spied. And you have to spy it quick before it disappears. Bonus points for spying the creatures that might be spied around us, not including the dragons, Hiccup, because we all know you're obsessed with dragons and like to cheat." "What?" Hiccup demanded. Snotlout sniggered in his saddle before receiving a mouthful of Night Fury tail. Flapping to regain his balance, Hookfang snorted a few smoke rings at Toothless in irritation. Another person to be grateful that Astrid isn't here, Hiccup commented. Better a night fury tail than an adder spike. For the duration of the trip, the gang settled into a routine of small talk and enduring Tough Nut's random series of games that made no sense for their current location. When he tried to start a game of Marco Polo, something he'd picked up from Johann, Hiccup nearly sighed with relief. Finally a small dot emerged on the horizon. He pointed it out to the others and, at long last, they began their descent. It was, there was no other word for it, gorgeous. Kiev had mentioned that they had a lot of natural resources, but those sorts of statements were usually made by proud chiefs with something to prove. It was a large island spread out over several miles with a horseshoe-shaped lagoon full of crystal clear water. It was perfect for swimming, and with all the fish that had to live in the surrounding reef, the village probably had more than enough fish. Near the lagoon was a spacious village full of horse-drawn carriages and little houses like Adriana's old doll houses. It was as if this island had been set up to be as different as possible from craggy Outcast Island or the busy trading outpost of Brawn. Bright green forests surrounded the village with rolling hills and mountains spreading out beyond. No wonder the Jatans had been so averse to joining the allied clans. Why share all of these incredible resources? To think that all it took was a new outlook on dragons. Hiccup and Toothless led their group over the docks, eyes scanning the people staring up at them with awe and trepidation. Finally, they picked out a single dark-haired individual waving them down from a dock farther down. Ivan's grin was filled with pride at the sight of Hiccup's people still gaping at the landscape around them. Toothless landed easily and Hiccup shook Ivan's hand once he'd dismounted. "I admit it, Ivan. Your island is stunning. You see why we've sequestered ourselves for so long," Ivan chuckled, nodding to the other Burkians. "But no more, I'll give a tour and where to meet my father and the council in the town hall for brunch." "Brunch?" Tough Nut asked, popping up between the chiefs. Ivan's eyebrows shot up when the blonde leaned in even closer. "What is this brunch you speak of?" "I think that's second breakfast, idiot." "No, dearest Fishlegs said to his wife gently. "Brunch is a mixture of breakfast and lunch." The hooligans gasped. "You can do that?" Tough Nut exclaimed. He whirled on Hiccup, finger pointing accusingly. "The things we have missed out on because of you. How do you sleep at night?" "Yes, thank you, Tough Nut, but let's not make Ivan reconsider our new treaty before we've even left the docks." Hiccup nudged his friend back, giving Ivan an apologetic smile. Ivan merely shrugged. "With 8 younger siblings, I'm used to it." Hiccup chuckled as he followed the chief onto the well-worn dirt path that led into a busy street. Men and women called out their wares as the group walked by, Hiccup keeping a close eye on the ever-so-curious Thorsten twins. A generous array of color covered the buildings that lined the streets. The Jatans seemed to have more shops than the basic workstations of Burke. Hiccup's blacksmith ears picked out the local forge quick enough, but he was intrigued by the wide number of other stores. He wondered if in a year's time there would be a saddle and riding leathers shop for all their dragon riding needs. Fishlegs paused as Rough Nut walked to a nearby store, looking in the tall glass window. Phlegma soon joined her with her face nearly pressed into the glass. Ivan chuckled. "That's our jewelry shop. Miles and his family handle all the crystals we harvest." Hiccup peered over Fishlegs' shoulder, green eyes widening. Jewels of every color lined the shelves in soft, velvet boxes. Earrings, necklaces, brooches, anything a person would want, and could afford, could be bought here. Ivan seemed to read his thoughts. In truth, Miles makes most of his sales in trade. We have some wealthy folk, but most Jatans don't walk around wearing glittering baubles when there's farm work to be done. "Farm work?" Horst asked. "I suppose that's past the woods then." "Yes, we have good soil in the fields. It's been tilled for generations, though we do have to rotate the plotting every few years." Ivan shrugged as they carried on down the street. "Agriculture isn't our strongest pursuit, but it puts food on the table." "As if that could be a struggle," Snotlout commented with raised eyebrows. A man walked past the group carrying a yoke, each pail filled to the brim with a corn and oat mixture. They watched as he walked into a nearby stable, where the sound of filling buckets was soon heard. "Horses," Hiccup mused. "Have you had them all this time?" Ivan nodded. When our ancestors settled here, they'd brought horses from their homeland. We've bred fine work horses through the generations, not to mention the war horses. Snotlout snorted. What's a war horse when you have a dragon? Hiccup was tempted to agree, but to a culture that had yet to befriend dragons, he figured war horses were just as valuable. Toothless sniffed the door to the stable, horses nickering from inside the building. The Night Fury hopped back skittishly when a horse reared inside, legs flailing. Hey bud, give them some space. Hiccup patted his dragon's shoulder, shrugging innocently at the fellow chief. Ivan merely watched the dragon with an awed expression. It might take the horses a little time to get used to dragons, he finally mused, waving them forward. Assuming this works. Hiccup matched his pace. Don't worry about that, I'm sure training will go smoothly. Once we get dragons integrated into the village with bonded riders, the animals will learn that they are not prey. But what if they are prey? Toothless warbled in agreement. Hey, not helping. Hiccup whispered hoarsely. To Ivan, he said, we don't have too many accidents with the livestock. Usually. Tough Nut snickered behind him and Hiccup resisted the urge to turn around and see what had the blonde so amused. No doubt remembering all the animals he'd gotten accidentally ingested because he'd teased Barf and Belch too much. But Ivan didn't need to know that. A fork in the road opened up to the town square, similar to Burke's own village center. But instead of being built out of a rock structure, Jut's town hall was a massive oak building, well worn with age. Carvings of dragons crested the roof edges and two statues were posted on either side of the door, one man and one woman. The founders of Jut, Marcus and Elena Sullivan. My ancestors. Ivan gazed up at the statues with a proud smile before leading the hooligans up the smooth rock stairs and into the hall. The hooligans surveyed the town hall with wide eyes, surprised at the large open space. It could have been about the same size as the Great Hall on Burke, but this building had no stone pillars. Instead the beams that had held up the walls were carved with loops and spirals in intricate detail. Numerous hearths warmed the large room while a group of people set large amounts of food on a table that stretched from one end of the hall to the other. Hiccup chuckled at Tough Nut's wide-eyed expression, his eyes glued to a glazed ham. What's that wooden structure up there? Fishlegs asked, pointing to the back wall. That's the stage where our people perform. You'll find Jut to be a theatrical and artistic village. With Hiccup as our chief, we are immune to theatrics. Ha ha. Hiccup rolled his eyes at Spitaloot. Ah, here we are. A burly man with graying blonde hair eased toward them, clapping Hiccup on the shoulder. Everyone make it all right. Hiccup greeted Kiev with the same enthusiasm. Yes, we did. Thank you for having us. Of course, Kiev waved a hand. He faced Toothless without batting an eye. Well, hello there, beastie. Toothless huffed indignantly, sitting back on his haunches. Don't mind this one, he's being a bit of a princess today. Ow. Hiccup ducked away from his dragon's swiping tail coming at him a second time. The Jatan stilled when Toothless growled and pushed his nose against Hiccup's chest. Toothless, get a grip, you're not starving. The dragon sneered his displeasure and Kiev chuckled, elbowing Ivan in the ribs. He and I are a lot alike, I think. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day after all. Except I'm sure you don't tear off the roof tiles when you're hungry. Hiccup raised an eyebrow at his dragon, who was pointedly ignoring him. His eyes were on a large tray of smoked salmon being set on the table. Kiev blinked his surprise and chuckled. He waved everyone toward a large table already prepared for them, surrounded by a group of men. Jut's councilmen. Greetings were exchanged, the meal blessed, and soon the large troop had heaping plates of food while villagers began to trickle in. Women seemed to keep their children closer at the sight of a night fury in their midst. While they ate, Kiev and Ivan pointed out various people in the room whom they thought Hiccup and his team could start with dragon training. They thought starting with the heads of security would be a good start, and in turn those men could begin training their footmen. What about the women? Rough Nut asked, clearly resisting the urge to throw her chicken bones over her shoulder as she always did. It was clear that the Jatans didn't dump food on the floor like the hooligans did. Suddenly Hiccup wondered if he'd raised an army of slobs, but at least Rough Nut showed a little restraint. Ivan shook his head firmly. No, the women will be staying on the ground. Homemaking is where they belong. Many of the hooligans frowned, but Hiccup kept his face neutral. He'd assumed as much when they signed the treaty. Phlegma opened her mouth to speak when a jovial tenor interrupted. Ivy, guess what happened this morning? A dark-haired boy of 18 threw himself onto the bench beside Ivan, nearly upsetting the councilman on his other side. The boy's dark brown eyes glittered with amusement as he leaned in close to what Hiccup assumed was his brother's face. I found a mushroom. Ivan kept his face straight. Thuggery, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Okay, but this wasn't just any mushroom. Thuggery shoved a hand in his pocket and withdrew a small purple mushroom. Mash this puppy you up and you know what you get. Thug. Purple paint. Duh. And you know who loves purple paint? Sophie does. I know that my daughter loves purple paint, but I am in the middle of a meeting. Ivan looked like he was straining not to ask his father to make his little brother leave, as that wouldn't be very chiefly. Hiccup was suddenly wondering if he was lucky for not having a little brother. Meeting. Thuggery's dark eyes met Hiccup's and his eyebrows shot up. Oh hey Chief. Thuggery Sullivan, at your service, should you need me. Pleasure, Hiccup remarked, perhaps a bit dryly. As he suspected, the boy didn't notice. It is a pleasure to meet me though, isn't it? At long last, Kiev heaved a sigh. Kiddo, why don't you go find Hannah? Because she's busy getting her hair done, a girl's voice replied. Hiccup looked over his shoulder and saw a curly-haired girl in a green frock, staring down at Thuggery with a disapproving frown. Half her blonde hair was pinned back in a twist at the back of her head while the rest hung loose at her shoulders. And it was only by her glittering dark eyes that he knew who she was. Genevieve Sullivan. Her eyes met his, a soft smile already on her face. Chief Haddock, it's a pleasure to meet you. You can call me Hiccup. He shook her hand gently, surprised at her firm grip. She had a slight build, but she had no trouble grabbing Thuggery by the collar and heaving him off the bench. Go away or I'll make you do my sewing. He wouldn't mind, then he could talk to Hannah. Kiev winked. Oh daddy, stop it, Genevieve sighed, Thuggery smirking wildly. Hiccup didn't know who this Hannah was, but he suspected that she did not like Thuggery's advances. He supposed he'd find out eventually. Join us, Jen. Kiev scooched over. Thuggery scoffed as she took the seat beside their father. You let her stay. I'm older and distinctly male. You're also late for your shift at the docks. Genevieve replied calmly, pouring herself a cup of orange juice. Thuggery whispered a curse before sprinting off. Kiev half stood from his seat with a displeased look. He met the hooligan's amused stares. I sincerely apologize for my son. No, it's all right. Hiccup shook his head. My son isn't always on time for work either. He means his mouth, Ivan muttered. Snotlout snickered across the table. Oh, don't feel bad, Hiccup's son has a bit of an unbridled tongue as well. Thank you, Snotlout. I'm just saying, when my son comes home from work and utters one foul word, and I hear it's from Finn. Hiccup kicked Snotlout under the table with his prosthetic. He flailed backwards with a mumbled growl of pain, his face turning purple. Don't curse, Snotlout, there's a lady at the table. Hiccup remarked. Toothless chortled at the Jorgenson's pain, his dragon laugh echoing through the hall. The crowd quieted for a moment before conversation picked back up again. Hiccup turned to Kiev and Ivan. Are your people that afraid of dragons? Sadly, yes. Particularly the women. Hiccup looked to Genevieve across from him, but her dark eyes were on the Night Fury sitting behind him. What do you think, Genevieve? Toothless met her gaze and her dark eyes darted to Hiccup. I'm not sure how I feel about the dragon training. I find it interesting. Her gaze swept over his people and he could almost see the questions flitting through her mind. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. He replied warmly as Ivan stood from his chair. Hiccup and the other hooligans followed suit. It was very nice to meet you, Genevieve. Likewise, Chiefa. Hiccup. Genevieve smiled, turning to give her father a goodbye kiss on the cheek. She left the group a moment later and was swept up in the growing crowd. We are taking you to the arena to show you our current, group of dragons. Ivan winced, waving a hand in the air. You have some in captivity? Hiccup asked, following him outside. Ivan looked a little nervous. Sadly yes. That's all right, Ivan. Makes the first part a little easier. How so? Kiev asked. Well, to train a dragon, you need a dragon. Hiccup concluded with an easy smile. This way we don't have to capture any by force. It was official, pregnancy was not fun. Adriana had been very excited when she felt the first flutters of movement inside of her. Admittedly, she still got a little jolt every time her baby moved. Her mind couldn't wrap itself around the fact that she was actually carrying another human being. Unfortunately, that was the only part of it she was enjoying. The morning sickness had been horrific, though that was finally over. She was officially in her second trimester, which meant that clothes that used to fit her comfortably were snug within a week. Her chest was sore and she'd had to get new bras twice already. To say nothing of the round belly she couldn't even try to hide anymore. A side effect she hadn't anticipated was the stairs. Sure, she was expecting them when she first got pregnant. But all of Burke had had plenty of time to get used to it. Now it seemed like many assumed her eyes were poking out of her belly instead of her face. It was annoying, but thankfully not all of the tribe was making her feel awkward. Many women had started offering her advice and thankfully, she appreciated most of it. She'd helped watch the Ingerman kids for most of the day and as fun as it was, she was starting to regret it. She groaned when she walked into her house, stretching her neck to stretch her muscles. Her back hurt. Her feet hurt. She was starving too. Surely there had to be some food in the house. It would be at least an hour before her mom came home. Just as she was considering standing on her sore feet to see what was in the cupboard, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Who is it? Toothless. Adriana smirked at the all-too-familiar voice. So jump through the window. They're all shut. Guess you're out of luck then. The door opened to reveal her boyfriend, dimples already on his face. Adriana felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her baby. Hey, she said brightly. Finn's not here. Eric smirked at her. Darn. That's totally who I came to see. He's probably sulking somewhere because he couldn't go to Jet with Dad, she said, biting her lip for a moment. I wish he could have gone. I feel bad knowing it's a teeny bit my fault what happened. A teeny bit. Eric sat at the coffee table next to her. It wasn't your fault at all. Adriana shrugged. Annie. Eric scooted forward slightly. You weren't walking in the woods in the middle of the night. Those guys jumped you in what should have been a safe area. I know, but still. It's been more than a month and he's still not better. She scratched at a line etched into the wooden table. Mom is worried about him. Finn will bounce back. He always does. Eric gently took her hand, massaging her fingers. Tingles shot through her palm and she moaned. Eric laughed. That feel good. MHM. Adriana smiled at him sweetly before she sighed dramatically. Listen to me. This is so dumb. Why is that? I'm tense everywhere. This isn't normal. It's perfectly normal, Eric remarked. Gregory always massaged Magnus's feet because they hurt halfway through the day. Yeah, feet. That makes sense. Hands. Those have muscles too. Adriana smiled, watching as he released her hand to massage the other. There were brown splotches on the back of his hands from staining leather. He needed the tense thumb joint of her palm and she sighed. Honestly, this shouldn't feel as good as it does. Eric merely laughed quietly in response. She looked up at him through her bangs and fought a giggle. There was a small stripe of brown stain on his chin. What are you laughing at? You. I didn't do anything. You didn't need to, Adriana replied, leaning forward. Ersik's hands stilled as she gently kissed his chin, then ghosted his lips with hers. She smiled at his expression, sliding back into her seat, but Eric followed by leaning forward and kissing her fully. It was strange how quickly things were changing. A mere few months ago, they'd skittered around each other like a couple of newborn deer, afraid of what might happen if they got too close. It was even more surprising how much bolder Eric had gotten. It seemed he didn't care anymore who was around or where they were. He was willing to kiss her any time. When he pulled away, his expression was slightly euphoric. That will never get old. His thumb gently swiped across her cheek. Despite her pounding heart, Adriana snorted. Give me a few months, you might be sick of me. I heartily disagree with that statement. Even as he spoke, his fingers threaded through the hair at the nape of her neck and twirled gently, sending shivers down her spine. Did he know just exactly what he was doing to her? Why would you think that? Thankfully his distracting ministrations ceased, his fingers trailing through her hair to her shoulder. Adriana sighed. Because I'll be the size of a moose soon. All fat and lumpy. Eric's face lit up in humor and something she couldn't place. You won't be fat and lumpy. Oh. What would you call it then? Curves. Though he seemed to be fighting it, a pink tinge spread across his face and creeped down his collar. It didn't matter how long they'd known each other. Nowadays he always seemed to turn to putty when talking about her. She found it both exciting and endearing. Adriana hid her amusement. Men. Huh. I say fat, you say curves. It's all a matter of perspective. Though he didn't look in the least bit convinced, Eric shrugged. I suppose. She squinted at him. You suppose? What do you want me to say? You're not fat. Not yet. Annie, being pregnant does not equate to being fat. It's different. And I'd love you either way, so why does it matter? It's easy to say these things when it hasn't happened yet, Adriana said with a small frown. Hey, if I was tired of you, don't you think I would have left by now? Eric asked, eyebrows raised. Here's a better question, do you have so little faith in me that I would dump you because of your weight, especially when you're pregnant? Adriana pursed her lips. He was right, she was being a bit ridiculous. Eric took her hands once more. I love you. I would be the biggest fool in the world to leave you for something so simple. It doesn't feel simple when I don't fit into any of my clothes, Adriana remarked, perhaps a bit sharply. I know, I'm not belittling the way you feel. But I don't see it that way. Your body is going to change for the baby, that's normal. Eric paused, looking down at their hands. Do you really feel like I'm not going to stay? Her heart twisted in her chest. No, of course not. Why would you think that? Because it seems like you bring it up a lot. Eric's eyes met hers. Like you expect me to get tired of you sometime in the near future. Did she? Adriana thought about everything that had happened recently. The last few weeks had been the most fun she'd had in a long time thanks to Eric. But there had been a lot of hard times as well, and the stress hadn't fully gone away. She was still insecure about a lot of things. She realized that whenever she wasn't feeling well or became emotional about something, she seemed to throw out little barbs of insecurity. That he'd get tired of her and move on when he'd directly promised her that he would do no such thing. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to be with her and help her raise this baby. So why did she keep making comments like she truly didn't believe him? Eric watched her think. Noticed when she made the connection and she looked up at him with wide eyes. I'm sorry. It's okay, Annie. No, it's not. Adriana pulled her hands away. She should be better than this, better than making him feel like he had to prove himself. Hey, Eric cocked his head to meet her eyes again. Don't pull away. Just talk to me. Adriana felt a spark of irritation at herself when her eyes began to burn. Why didn't she trust him? Was it because she was that insecure about herself? Was it because her only other boyfriend had mistreated her so horribly that now she found herself struggling to trust Eric? Waiting for him to leave too. You're not even the one who hurt me. You're not the one who left. Tears splashed down her front and she wiped her face. I want to trust you. I don't know why I don't. I thought I did. Annie, hey, Eric scooted his chair close enough so their knees touched. He pulled her hands back and made her look at him. You have every right to feel the way you do. What he did? A spark of rage flashed in his eyes. Even if you weren't pregnant and he hadn't done that to you, ditching you the way he did, even forcing you to do the things you didn't want to do, like hanging out with those people. He didn't care about you, Annie. That's why you're afraid. You know what I mean. Adriana nodded. Brandine had pretended to be her friend, acted like they had something special. But it was clear what he'd been after all along. And he was going to Dana for what I wouldn't give him. Eric's eyes flashed again. Yeah. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. When he seemed to put a leash on his anger, he squeezed her hands. Annie, I want you to understand something. Love is a choice. Don't you think? Adriana thought for a moment and nodded. Because after everything that's happened, it's the people that are still standing next to you who really care. The ones who choose to stay with you when you're hurting. When you need a hug or a friend. Your parents, Finn, Cliff. You. Adriana smiled despite her tears. Eric wiped her cheek with his thumb. Me. There are many others. You're not alone, Annie. We love you and we're not going anywhere. Pressing his brow to hers, he quietly added, I'm not going anywhere. Adriana laughed slightly, feeling the reassurance lift her spirits. She never should have doubted him, but she supposed that's what made relationships work. You had to talk through things to be on the same page, especially the hard things. There was a momentary pause as Eric leaned back again, furrowing his brow the tiniest bit as if he was deep in thought. He seemed to be trying to make a decision, or trying to figure out how best to say what he was thinking. She wasn't sure which. Eric said, letting go of her hands. I want to show you something. Adriana watched, eyebrows slightly raised, as Eric tugged his sleeves back to reveal his lower arms. He stared at them for a moment, an unreadable expression on his face, before lowering them so she could see them clearly. It felt like her lungs had stopped working for a few seconds. Up and down his inner arms were faint white scars, faded but definitely visible. A gasp escaped her and she held one of his wrists, shakily running a hand over the scars. Adriana looked up at him in shock. Eric's face was blank. Not many people knew about it. But, it was your parents that helped me get through it. Helped me stop. Realization dawned on her. That's why you stayed at my house, why your arms were always wrapped up. I still have a hard time wearing shorter sleeves out of shame, he murmured, teal eyes downcast. I don't want people to ask questions, and I never did tell you about it. He hadn't. Her mind was suddenly in a whirl. Why had he never told her? Maybe because he didn't trust her. Even after everything she'd trusted him with, he'd never told her. Adriana clamped down on the urge to demand why he never told her. She didn't feel anger, just confusion. He saw the unspoken question in her eyes and he seemed to shrink. I blamed myself for what happened to Aud. For not stopping her. Adriana shook her head. That wasn't your fault. I know that now. My family didn't help me, but we've made amends. My mom has anyway. Eric rubbed his forehead. She could tell by the way he kept his eyes down that it was hard to talk about this. It was hard to stop cutting after so long. I hated myself so much and I felt so unwanted. I just wanted it to end. Tears spilled down her face once again and she took his hands. Her best friend had been suicidal and she'd never known. He'd never told her. Hey, it's okay now. Eric gently brushed her tears away. You never told me, Adriana squeaked. She hated asking, wondering if she was selfish for doing so, but the word slipped out before she could stop it. Why? Eric's expression crumpled and he looked down at his scarred arms. I was ashamed of myself, Annie. I still am. She thought her heart would burst when his eyes suddenly filled. I've locked those feelings away so deep that when I realized I'd never told you, I didn't want to open that door again. He rubbed his eyes with his fingers and sighed. His face was splotchy when he rasped, I never want to feel like that again. So I refused to think about it. Adriana pursed her lips and lunged forward to hug him tight. She hated seeing him nearly cry, could hardly stand the thought. Eric buried his face in her neck and took a deep, steadying breath. They hugged silently for nearly a minute. Finally, Eric said in a quiet voice, but your mom. A small laugh escaped him. Stubborn woman. What did she do? Adriana pulled back, wiping her face. She found me, brought your dad, and they helped me. My family was making things worse, and so your parents pulled me out of the house. One day at a time, I started turning a corner and then, well, Finn got caught with the gang and he twisted his prosthetic leg against the floorboards. I lost this. Adriana stared at him. Gods, it was so much worse than I realized. Eric shrugged. It's okay. I'm glad it happened. It brought you back to me, didn't it? She felt her heart lift a little. The silver lining. I suppose it did, yeah. Eric smiled wanly and took her hands once again. This is why I told you. Because when the bad stuff happens, we see who really loves us in the end. Who will drop everything to take care of you. Those are the people you can trust the most. He took a deep breath and sighed. So, Annie, that is my deepest, darkest secret. I want you to know because I love you, and I trust you. I'm sorry for doubting you, Adriana whispered. Eric tilted her chin up. I forgive you. When he kissed her this time it was soft, yet firm. It almost felt different than it usually did. It wasn't mere passion. It felt deeper, maybe because at long last, there were no walls drawn between them. Pressing closer, she wrapped her arms around his neck. Eric rested his hands on her waist, moaning as she threaded her fingers through his hair. The door opened and Adriana jerked back, their lips separating with a loud pop in the otherwise quiet room. Finn paused in the doorway, a single eyebrow rising as Eric tried to disentangle himself from her arms. Her brother's blue eyes darted between them nearly 3 times and Adriana lifted her chin, daring him to say any of the probable dirty comments running through his head. Eric not so subtly wiped his lips on his sleeve. Instead Finn just shrugged and walked farther into the house, swinging the door shut as he went. The house was significantly quiet as Finn ambled through the kitchen, perusing the shelves for Thor knew what. Adriana glanced at Eric, who looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die somewhere. Perhaps not as bold as she originally thought. Oh, carry on, don't mind me. Adriana grabbed a wooden salt shaker and launched it at her brother. He ducked and it crashed against the wash bin, salt scattering across the countertop. Shut up, Finn. Finn eased back to a standing position with a wince. You two make it so awkward. What do you want us to do? Adriana frowned, face heating again. Eric still looked a bit mortified, probably because he'd still been moaning when the door opened. I'm not sure that I want to know, Finn sang, pouring himself a drink. Because your faces are both quite red and splotchy. She was crying, Eric replied flatly. You certainly weren't. Gar Finn. Eric growled, launching the pepper shaker at him this time. Finn yelped when the shaker smacked him in the back. He hissed in pain, causing them both to wince in apology as he turned back around. Anyway, why did you make her cry? We were only talking about things. Adriana sighed. It's fine. Really? She insisted when Finn raised his eyebrows and made a face. HMPH. You better hope so, Finn replied. I was getting ready to body slam Eric into next Thursday. Eric snorted. You'd be putting yourself right back into bed for 3 weeks. Which is exactly why I restrained myself. Adriana rolled her eyes at Eric, fighting a smile. To Finn, she asked, what's for dinner? Oh, let's see. Finn pulled open the icebox. We've got eggs, lamb, eggs, bacon, bread on the counter, eggs, a little bit of dried fish, that looks about 6 weeks old. And let's see, oh, there's eggs. Make some omelets, Finnegan. Finn closed the icebox with an audible snap. I am a wounded man. And I'm pregnant. Eric, make some omelets. You're not the chief yet, Eric replied smoothly. I can still body slam you into next Thursday, and bed rest will be worth it. Eric rolled his eyes and stood. Omelets. I can do better than omelets. Finn eagerly took his vacated seat. Pray tell, what is better than omelets? Yes, pray tell, what is better than omelets? Adriana asked, also intrigued. Her boyfriend merely gave her a warm smile before pulling out a pan and various ingredients. What time is your mom coming home? Half hour. Perfect. Within minutes the house smelled of bacon. Finn asked why Eric had a bowl of water simmering, but he didn't reply. Do you have any lemons? Finn blinked slowly. Lemons and bacon. With eggs. In the basket behind you, Adriana replied, shooting her brother a look. They watched in fascination as Eric dropped 3 eggs yolks into a bowl with some lemon juice and what looked like a ton of softened butter. Then, one at a time, he dropped 4 egg yolks into the simmering water. Ignoring Finn's confused splutters about barbaric cooking skills, Eric searched around for a whisk. Adriana didn't know what he was doing. He whisked the egg yolks, lemon juice and butter at a rapid pace, stopping only to taste test and add salt and pepper. Finn, runny eggs or no? But you already cooked them. Eric smirked while he whisked. Did I? Finn frowned. Runny. Annie does not like runny. Eric concluded, making her smile. What does Mama Astrid like? Runny. Both kids replied at once. Eric nodded, setting aside his bowl of yellow sauce. Adriana peered into the bowl curiously while Finn peeked over her shoulder with crinkled brows. You can taste it if you want. I don't want to spoil the surprise, Adriana replied. Finn swiped his finger into the dip, staring at it unsurely. Finally he gave it a tentative taste. It's like lemony butter. Or buttery lemon. Eric snorted. The twins looked up a moment later to see Eric setting egg yolks on 2 toasted, buttered pieces of bread and bacon. How he'd managed to get the egg yolks out of the hot water without breaking or dropping them, and toast and butter bread without their notice, she couldn't tell. Eric's multitasking skills had far surpassed her own apparently. Her boyfriend grabbed the bowl of sauce and poured a generous spoonful onto each plate. He wiped away a few spare drips before stepping back with a smile. There you have it. Adriana wasn't sure what it was, but it looked really good. Finn's voice broke into her thoughts. What is it? She rolled her eyes. Bacon and eggs and toast. Yeah, but it's so fancy. Eric smirked. Eat up, barbarian. That's Finnegan to you. Right on cue, the front door opened and Astrid stopped on the threshold. Something smells good. Eric made dinner. Adriana accepted a fork from Eric and sat down at the table. Wait. Eric ushered Astrid into the first seat, surprisingly fast on 1.5 legs. He set a plate in front of her and Finn before sitting next to Adriana with his own plate. Okay. Dig in. Eric's nervous Finn murmured. I think he poisoned it. Oh seriously? Adriana rolled her eyes. Eric cut into his food and took a bite with a shrug. No poison. His face screwed up in thought. Needs more salt. He hopped out of his chair to retrieve the condiments. Oh. And if anyone wants cayenne pepper on theirs, my dad used to like his eggs Benedict with a little kick. Eggs Benedict? Adriana asked, her first bite hovering on her fork in front of her face. Eric took a pinch of salt and threw it over his shoulder. For luck. He dashed some on Adriana's plate. For my love. Oh geez. Finn muttered before finally taking a bite. Eric seemed to watch the haddocks with a bit of nervousness. Adriana took a bite and was pleasantly surprised. It was a different way to make eggs and bacon and toast, but a strangely delicious way. Babe, this is really good. Eric sighed a bit in relief. Yeah. It's very good, Eric. Astrid agreed. Finn didn't reply, since he was digging in wholeheartedly. What is eggs Benedict exactly? Eric shrugged. My family always made them. It's actually our Snoggletog breakfast tradition. And thus your birthday breakfast tradition. Adriana cheered. She paused, realizing, how come I've never seen it before? He rolled his eyes, chewing quickly before replying, my mom is quite protective of it. Something about one of the few family traditions we have left. And we just watched you do it. Finn shrugged his eyebrows up and down. Now I've got your recipe. Eric smirked. We'll see about that. Like it's hard. You did that in like 20 minutes. Adriana saw the challenge in Eric's eyes and realized he'd chosen this particular meal on purpose. He might have finally found something that Finn couldn't beat him at. Oh, it's on. Finn smirked. One day, boys, we'll have a cook-off. Then we can crown one of you the winner. Astrid gave them a conspirator's smile. If only your father was here to try it. My only regret. Eric frowned. No worries, you can make it for us in our haddock snoggletog mornings. Finn winked, grabbing plates and shuffling into the kitchen. Eric beamed. Finn had actually said a positive thing about their future. Hear anything from Dad? Adriana asked. He's supposed to come home tonight, isn't he? Yes, but probably not till dark. Astrid replied, eyes on Finn. Adriana looked over her shoulder to watch her brother as well. He seemed to be moving a little better, but she could hear his feet dragging. Good job, Eric. Adriana kissed his cheek. But I'm afraid I want ice cream. Oh, Finn wants ice cream too. Eric let out a small laugh. I'll go get Milady ice cream, but what makes you think I'll get you ice cream? Something silver flashed in the air and Eric caught it in his hand. A silver coin shimmered in his palm. Finn brandished the dirty whisk toward the door, spattering his shirt with egg remains. Off you get. What am I, your slave? Eric asked. Finn's face fell and he turned away. Adriana fought to keep her expression neutral, but Eric, her smart, intuitive boyfriend, instantly saw his error. The problem was he didn't understand why. He looked between the tense haddocks with a single glance. It's okay, Adriana said quietly, standing and ushering him to the door. 2 gigantic ice creams will do, okay. Eric looked over her head at Finn, clearly wishing he could take back his words. Adriana pressed another coin into his hand. Get him hot fudge and walnuts and he'll be okay. Eric looked unsure still, but he left the house. She watched him and Charger take off toward the great hall where anybody could get ice cream from the cook. When she closed the door, she saw Astrid already in the kitchen at Finn's side. He didn't mean it, Finn. No, I know that. He replied softly. It just took me by surprise is all. Adriana handed him a few dirty cups to wash. Don't you think you should tell him? He wouldn't tell anybody. Finn pursed his lips. How do I know that? Indignation rose in her chest. Why would he tell anybody? Anna, he promised not to tell anyone about your pregnancy. That's different, and that's not something I should have hidden. You know what I'm saying though, Finn faced her. It's not that I don't want to trust him, but that's not. I don't want a lot of people knowing about it. I'd prefer that part of my life to just fade into the background. Surely you understand that. Adriana sighed. She did understand what he meant. But just like she wished she could forget about Brandine altogether, she had very real proof in her belly of the things she'd endured. So Finn couldn't just ignore the past. Then again, Eric hadn't told her about his suicidal tendencies until tonight for the same reason Finn hadn't ever told Eric about his enslavement. She supposed it would take some more time, but Finn would trust Eric with that information when he was good and ready. Astrid patted his shoulder. We understand, Finn, and it's your decision to make. But I think Eric is trustworthy. You might find it a bit freeing to share it with at least one of your best friends. Finn sighed. Maybe. Astrid made to sit down in the living room when suddenly a sonic scream filled the air outside. There's your dad. With a big grin, Adriana hopped out of her seat and followed her mom onto the porch. They waited for Hiccup and Toothless, smiling into the darkness. Except the sonic sound had faded into the distance and they hadn't yet landed. Adriana's smile slipped off her face. Mom, where? Finn stepped onto the porch behind them. They haven't landed yet. Astrid stepped into the grass, looking out toward the sea with a pinched brow. After nearly a minute and still no sign of them, she turned back inside. Come on. But. Adriana stared out at the ocean. If he was home, why would he leave again? Maybe he left something on Jet. Finn sounded unconvinced of his own thought. Astrid merely ushered them back inside and closed the door against the darkness, leaving them wondering just where the chief of Berk might have gone to at such a late hour. Chapter 24, Nemesis. Chapter text. It had been a long day when Hiccup and Toothless led their people through the 2 stone warriors that guarded the entrance to Berk. The sky was dark and cloudless, stars twinkling overhead as the chief bid his council good night and Toothless swept toward the Haddocks' home past the bridge. The journey had been a long one after an early morning and an entire day of dragon training. The integration of dragons into Jat needed a lot of structure, since no Jatans had ever witnessed dragon training in person. Ivan and Kiev had asked many questions throughout the day, both men seemingly determined to retain as much information as they could. Nearly a dozen dragons were in pens, which Hiccup had quickly calmed and befriended. The Jatans who'd come to watch the spectacle Udi and Adi so much that Hiccup almost felt like he was working in a circus rather than working. Luckily he'd successfully paired the dragons off with various councilmen. While Kiev had yet to find his own dragon, Ivan had become intrigued with a deep blue deadly nadder. Overall, things were off to a great start. After a late dinner in the town hall, Hiccup had gathered his people for the long trek home, promising Ivan that they would return within the next week to check their progress. Their only homework so far was bonding. Each rider needed to become well acquainted with his dragon and build trust between them. The dragons would remain in the arena, which sadly still had a chained dome overhead. Hiccup insisted however that they needed free range of the arena itself. He would tackle integration into daily home life on another day. Kiev had been grinning from ear to ear all day, much like his son Thuggery. Genevieve had kept to the stands, as did the few other women present, but the two Sullivan teenagers had kept up a steady stream of banter that only reminded him of home. His heart gave a twinge at the thought of Finn and Adriana. Hiccup wondered if his kids hadn't been dealt such a low hand throughout their lives if they might be as easygoing and joyful as the Sullivans. Deep in his thoughts as he was, Hiccup was nearly thrown from the saddle when Toothless swept around a few large pine trees. He mumbled an apology and focused on the last few minutes of the flight as the house came into view. While Adriana and Finn were both doing better than they had in the last few weeks, it bothered him when he saw how different his kids' lives were compared to the Sullivans. On more than one occasion he'd seen the sad, downcast look in Adriana's eyes when she thought nobody was looking. It bothered him that Finn exuded confidence most of the time, but on occasion he'd tense, his blue eyes freezing on a fixed point as if something had triggered horrible memories that he never should have experienced. Hiccup's heart gave a jolt. He yanked on Toothless' rigging, causing his friend to yelp in surprise. Toothless stopped in midair, peering up at him in confusion. Rare. Hiccup stared at his home from their place in the sky. Flame from the hearth glowed through the windows, shadows darting across the front yard. He knew his wife and children were inside, and possibly Eric or Cliff. He wondered if they were having a good evening together or if Finn was again passed out on the couch with exhaustion due to his wound, or if Adriana's head was again in a bucket from her pregnancy. He despised the thought, but his children didn't deserve to have all this worry and strain on their bodies. They deserved to be happy, to goof off and not have a care in the world, like Kiev's children. Was it because they were his children that they'd been dealt such a bad hand? They were only 17, he'd been on many harrowing, crazy adventures by the time he was 17. But never had he experienced anything quite as painful as they had. His gaze slid to the open ocean. There once was a time when he'd fought for what he wanted. Before he became a father, the only things that mattered to him were Toothless, Astrid and freeing dragons. He'd never held Astrid back, but he always made sure she was safe. She and all their friends, even though he'd led them into many stupid situations. With dragons, he'd have flown to the ends of the archipelago to even save one. So why had he sat by the last few months and let Brandine roam free? Rare. Toothless warbled again, following his gaze. He'd kept telling himself that Brandine wasn't worth it. That his daughter needed him more. Finn had been chomping at the bit to track Brandine down, to bring him to justice for daring to hurt his sister, and Hiccup had held him back. Finn's injury had pushed Brandine out of his mind even further, and since he'd been so occupied with Jet. Hiccup shook his head, his chest burning with anger. Brandine was probably comfortable in his mother's house, thinking he'd escaped and gotten away with his crimes, probably congratulating himself on messing with the chief of Burke and living to tell the tale. Well, Hiccup resolved, vengeance had no measure of time and he had the cover of darkness on his side. Perhaps it was time to remind the archipelago just what happened when you messed with the Dragon Conqueror and the offspring of lightning and death itself. Toothless Hiccup leaned forward and locked eyes with his best friend. What do you say we go hunting, bud? Toothless heard that sharp edge in his voice and somehow understood, as if he could read his mind. His lip curled in a growl as he swiveled toward the ocean, green eyes narrowed to slits. Hiccup snapped the tail fin into position and together they dropped, flattening themselves against the cold, open air. A sonic scream filled the air and they blasted across the waves toward Outcast Island. Raucous laughter echoed through the Brand house. Clyde and Joan Brand smiled at their two children laughing comically over a game Alton had brought back from some faraway place. The auburn-haired boy had his hands over his head, fingers spread wide for effect in his storytelling. I kid you not, Johan's pants got caught on the creature's horns. They started hauling the animal's body away and taking him with it. If I hadn't chased them down and gestured at them wildly, they probably wouldn't have noticed they'd inadvertently kidnapped a Viking trader. Better is the fact they didn't speak Norse. Clyde chuckles. Hence the wild gesticulating. Taryn wiped her face, finally catching her breath. Wow, that is hilarious. What animal was it, son? Clyde asked. Some kind of deer, but 3 times bigger. Alton spread his arms, despite his unsure expression, as if he knew his arms would not do the creature justice. It was massive. How were they able to move a dead animal so huge and catch a man on its antlers? Taryn asked. They call it taxidermy, Alton replied, taking his turn on the game. You kill an animal and pay somebody to clean and stuff its body, or its head or something, so you can mount it in your house. Or the Great Hall. Their mother tsked her tongue. It sounds barbaric. Killing an animal just to keep it stuffed on a wall. Well, you can still use the meat, Mom. Still. The woman tsked again, standing from her chair. I'm going to prepare for bed. You two should as well. Oh, but Mom, Alton whined. Listen to your mother, son. Their father stood as well and followed her up the stairs, their voices quiet in the upstairs. Alton flopped back onto the floor. Don't they understand that I had the stars for a roof for 6 months? That I didn't exactly have a bedtime, it just kind of happened when exhaustion took over. Taryn snorted and poked him in the ribs. That explains the bags under your eyes. PFT, you get used to the late nights. Alton sat up on his elbows, suddenly grinning. He lowered his voice, glancing toward the stairs. So, you and Cliff, huh? Her stomach tied in knots and her eyes darted to the upstairs. Alton, be quiet. Oh come on, they're not listening. Indeed, she could hear her parents laughing upstairs, their mom still ranting about poor stuffed animals resting on people's walls. Tell me what's going on. Alton tried again. She sighed heavily. Dad chased him away, so nothing. He hasn't spoken to me since. Alton frowned. You haven't really given him a chance to. Give him a chance. Taryn hissed. I'd rather not be yelled at for my disappointing behavior when I haven't done anything wrong. That's not your fault, Ter. Alton said quietly. Mom and Dad are way too overprotective. I didn't realize how bad it was until I was out of the house, until Johan was in charge of me. I admit it was a bit too much freedom. He paused, thinking. Mom and Dad have done a good job teaching us how to take care of ourselves. But that doesn't mean they're doing us any favors by smothering us. Especially you. You're a boy, there are more opportunities for you. Taryn grumbled. Not true, Alton countered. You should have seen the things young women do overseas. I don't live there, Alton, I live here. She replied sharply. I love that you've gotten to go and have adventures and that you're allowed to leave the house whenever you want. But reminding me how much I can't does not help me stay content with what I have. You don't need to be content, Taryn. Alton hissed, trying to keep his arguing quiet. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to want a boyfriend like every other girl. Taryn looked away. Wanting and having are two different things. Do you want Mom and Dad to find a husband for you? Taryn glared at him. Exactly. It's not going to change until you fight for it. I don't want to fight for anything, Taryn replied. So you're content to live a quiet, demure life without wanting anything. You know that's not true. Alton, please. Taryn huffed, rubbing her eyes in irritation. The house was quiet for a few minutes before he spoke again. Do you know why I begged them to let me go with Johann? Taryn sighed. No. It was all so sudden. Because I was so tired of the same routine every single day. Alton looked out the window, as if he could see the faraway lands from here. I was tired of the tucked-in shirts and following Mom and Dad everywhere I went. I wanted an open sky and fresh air, where I could just breathe. He looked at her. I wanted freedom. You may not want to up and leave so drastically, but I know you're not happy. Taryn's heart heaved. I know, I'm not. But I'm not brave like you. To leave or to tell them how I feel. Maybe that's something you need to work on. You shouldn't be afraid to talk to them. Alton chewed his lip thoughtfully. Cliff would be good for you, you know. He'd show you just how much opportunity a beautiful girl like you has. Alton put the lid on the game and stood, putting it in the nearby closet. Taryn felt her throat constrict. She knew he was right. But nothing hurt more than hearing her father say that she'd disappointed him. She didn't know what would be more painful, going against her parents' wishes or watching them plan out her life for her and going right along with it. I'm going to bed. She replied promptly and stood, walking up the stairs without a further good night. She could feel her brother's eyes on her back as she disappeared into her room. Alton couldn't understand. He'd tasted freedom and was allowed to make a man's decisions now. She didn't have that kind of luxury and wouldn't argue with him about it. Taryn changed into a warm pair of pajamas and took her hair out of its bun. She brushed her hair and slowly began braiding it back, her mind still reeling with unspoken thoughts. She heard herself muttering and stopped, sighing long and hard. She dropped her hands into her lap. She stared at the long, half-braided auburn tresses. For so long she'd worn her hair back in some sort of style, she didn't realize how tired of it she was until now. Tentatively, she pushed her fingers into her hair and brushed it out, letting it frame her face. If she got her hair cut and added some layers, she might have a similar style to Adriana's. Or if she parted her hair more to the left and swept her hair over her shoulder, she might have similar hair to Inga. Or if she let it hang wild and free, never brushed or styled at all, maybe she'd look like Helga. She snorted, dragging her hair back from her face. She was a little surprised at how her eyes didn't look quite so big without her hair pulled back against her scalp. Instead, it seemed to bring out the flakes of gold in her eyes, and the added volume toned down her sharp cheekbones. Even the pinkish hue of her lips was softened. Staring in the mirror, she saw someone different than usual. Relaxed, moderate, but still pretty. Glancing down at the creams and brushes on her small bureau, she frowned. She'd always been told she was lovely, she hadn't been vain enough to listen. She'd never enjoyed the makeup and the tight buns, what they represented. For some reason it boggled her mind, if she wasn't meant to draw attention to herself, why must she go to so much trouble on her appearance? It seemed all the attention she put on not drawing attention to herself made her look older than she was, which in turn brought attention to herself. Resolutely, Taryn shoved all of her face creams and makeup into the drawers. It sent a clatter of sound throughout the otherwise quiet house, but she didn't care. Let them come and ask. Maybe she'd be bold and finally tell them what her brother and closest friends had been telling her for so long, what she was finally beginning to understand. But no one came. Her parents must have finally gone to bed, and Alton occupying himself with something downstairs or retiring to his own room as well. Taryn lay down on her bed, hair fanned around her head like a halo. Her mind was still buzzing, so it would be a while before sleep claimed her. She didn't want to read or do a puzzle, she didn't feel like seeking out her brother again for the night. She chewed her lip in thought, running her fingers through her hair. An idea popped into her mind and she nearly gasped out loud at the audacity of it. Her heart thumped in her chest when she considered the implications of such a thing. She didn't have the guts to do anything so rash and daring and adventurous. A slow smile spread across her face. Alton would be beside himself if he knew what she was thinking. But he was right in the end. She had to start doing something with her life, she had to allow herself to want things and not feel bad about it. She needed to take a chance and do something unequivocally spontaneous. As quietly as possible, Taryn crept out of bed and pulled out a pair of warm pants and a sweater. Changing clothes quickly and pulling on her most comfortable pair of boots, She blew out the candle and crept to her window. She listened for any sounds from the rest of the house, but only silence greeted her. Lifting the window and peering down at the ground below, she gulped. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was she seriously doing this? What if she fell? What if one of the guards walking the streets or the neighbors saw? What would they think of the Brown's good daughter, creeping out late at night? Taryn huffed at herself. This was exactly her problem. Have an adventure, Taryn, come on, she whispered to herself, swinging a leg out the window. You can do this. She swung both legs out, standing on a wooden beam jutted out below her window. She held on tight and slowly, very carefully, she crept down the side of the house. Taryn dropped to the ground a minute later and crouched in the dirt, listening for any sound of her family. She waited nearly 2 minutes before a slow grin spread across her face. Call it rebellion or call it adventure, Taryn was out of the house outside of curfew with only one destination in mind. She darted into the shadows and didn't look back. A tentative knock sounded at the door and Cliff uncoiled himself from the couch. He'd been half asleep as he waited for Eric to come home, but at this point he figured his bestest bro would come home super late. Again. He walked to the door, curious who might be calling on him at such an hour, scolding Eric in his mind that he really shouldn't keep Adriana up so late. He swung the door open and blinked in surprise. Taryn Brand was standing in the doorway, auburn hair loose and brown eyes glittering. He blinked again, a bit harder this time. Someone told me that a certain Mr. Smedley likes adventure, Taryn said with a mysterious sort of smile. Holy gods, that smile. Cliff blinked again, his heart hammering in his chest. Well, if this wasn't one of the weirdest, most wonderful dreams he'd ever had. Cliff? Taryn asked, waving a hand in front of his face. He shook out of his thoughts and looked over her shoulder. No parents, no guards. Taryn's smile disappeared and she took a step back. Never mind. No, wait. Cliff reached out and pinched her sleeve, pulling her inside before she could run away. Sorry, I'm just confused, I guess. He breathed a laugh as he shut the door. What are you doing here? Taryn paused, fiddling with her sleeves that covered most of her hands. Only her fingertips showed at the ends and he was surprised her parents allowed her to own such a baggy item of clothing. I was bored and... A shrug and her eyes darted back to the door. Cliff couldn't help the concern rising up. Taryn, are you okay? She looked up at him in surprise. Yes. Yes, I'm fine. He was so confused. Are you sure? Because you're kind of acting funny. Taryn sighed, running a hand through her long hair. She turned and paced through his living room. I'm sorry, I really shouldn't be here. Cliff didn't mind. He didn't mind at all that she was in his little house and it was just the two of them. But that was dangerous thinking. Not that he wanted anything at all, it was just scary that he hadn't talked to her in a few weeks now because of her dad and now she was here in his house. And she'd come alone. Should I leave? Taryn asked, breaking the silence. Cliff started. No, I mean. He shook his head to clear it, his wild mane of curls shaking. No. You're sure you're okay? Yes. Taryn nodded. So, what brings you to my doorstep at such a late hour? Cliff asked. I need an adventure. Cliff's eyebrows shot up and he laughed. Right now? Well, you are the adventure guru. Taryn crossed her arms. Yes, but, now. His laugh died in his throat. Not that I'm against adventures, but, what about your dad? You know he'll kill me if he finds you missing. Unless by the gods' good graces he gave your blessing to hang out with me and leave the house at night all in one go. Taryn winced. Yeah, not exactly. You do know what happened the last time teenagers in this village started sneaking around. I'm not asking you to help me tear apart the Great Hall, Cliff. I know, I'm just saying. He paused. He truly wanted to hang out with Taryn but he didn't want to make things worse. Don't you think we should? What? That fearful look was back in her eyes. Like she was ready to pin her hair back and run back to her house full of rules and regulations. Cliff wet his lips. I would love to have an adventure with you. But I don't want you to get into trouble. If I am getting in trouble for you walking me home, then when am I ever going to do anything in my life other than what they demand? Taryn asked boldly. There was a passion in her eyes he'd never seen before as she said, I've done everything they have ever asked and asked for nothing back. I'm not doing this out of rebellion. I'm doing this because I want to have fun for once. I want to be reckless and stop questioning everything around me. I want to do something. And she faltered, swallowing hard, but she took a small step closer to him. And the only one who has ever gone out of their way to help me do that is you, Cliff. His heart leapt with something that might have been joy, and he wasn't even sure why. It could have been multiple things, the fact that she attributed her new bravery to his kindness, or because she was looking at him with those dark brown eyes like that. Cliff exhaled another laugh, daring a look down at his feet. Calming his racing heart with a deep breath, he met her gaze again. Let's have an adventure, Miss Brand. Taryn grinned up at him, and that was all the answer he needed before he was pulling on his boots and a jacket. He quickly doused the candles and wondered if he should leave a note for Eric. But nah, his bro had ditched him more than enough times for his girl. Time to return the favor. He paused at the thought, sparing a short glance at Taryn, who was watching him with anticipation. He cleared his throat and spread his hands in the darkened room. Where are we going? Taryn shrugged. A walk in the woods. A walk in the woods, she says. Cliff eased the door open and escorted her outside, glancing up and down the street for guards. No footsteps were heard and no torchlight to be seen. Cliff led the way around the back of the little house, and together they crept through the dark streets. Eventually they came upon a well-worn path that led through the woods toward the cove where the chief had found Toothless all those years ago. It was a good distance away from the village and would give them more than enough time to talk. Taryn kept pace with him, which surprised him since he was much taller than her. But he supposed she'd been taught to keep a brisk pace. He frowned at the thought and winced when she looked up at the exact same time. What's wrong? Cliff gave her a smile. Nothing. Taryn stopped. Cliff, don't put up a face. If you're really uncomfortable with this. Taryn. Cliff faced her. Don't worry about me. I just don't want you to feel like I'm forcing you to do this. If you don't want to get in trouble and I'm trying to make you do something you don't want to, I don't know, you're the guy, so you should be making the decision here. She was rambling now and Cliff waved his hands in front of her. Wait. What? Taryn stopped talking, eyebrows high. What? Cliff gave her an incredulous look. There is no submission to be had here. She bit her lip and looked away. Cliff sighed and gentled his approach. Taryn. You're my friend. You don't answer to me. I'm out here because I want to be. That doesn't mean I'm not a little bit confused and that I'm not trying to figure this out. Figure what out? Figure you out, Cliff stressed. You're the most interesting girl I've ever known. She looked up at him in surprise, like she didn't believe him. It's like you have all these hidden layers under that outer shell they've forced you to wear. You're like an onion. Taryn barked an incredulous laugh. Oh, very flattering, Cliff. Cliff rolled his eyes. I'm not good with words like Eric, just bear with me. She nodded silently, her eyes downcast. He wondered if he should say it. His heart began pounding in his chest and he tried to think around it, but now that was all that was filling his mind. Cliff took a deep breath and said it, I like you, Taryn. Her dark eyes darted to his face, and though she said nothing at first, her mouth curled into a soft, shy smile. He took that as an opportunity to keep talking. I know I'm not what your dad expects for you. But the way we just have fun together, it just feels like there's something there. Gods, what was he even saying? Eric would be running a hand down his face right about now. A blush crept up his neck and he was glad it was dark outside. The only thing I'm afraid of is if your dad never gave me a chance to prove myself. I'm not a proper, traditional guy, I'm loud and obnoxious and a hot mess most days. Taryn laughed with him and he took that as an encouragement. But I want to try. It's hard to see you carry yourself like you can't breathe, like you're coiled so tightly you're about to snap. That can change with time. I've seen the way you loosen up and know that's not the kind of life you want. But that doesn't mean that I can't change too. Taryn shook her head. You shouldn't have to change for me. I can stand a little change if it means I get a shot at dating a pretty girl like you. Cliff replied. He blinked, wondering where that dash of charm had come from. Taryn's shy smile was creating some serious butterflies in his stomach. Taryn bit her lip, looking up at him for a quiet minute. I think I like you too, Cliff. I don't know what I'm looking for right now, but... Her lip wobbled and her breath caught. She looked away hastily. Cliff's heart crushed. He reached forward and took her hand without thinking. I'm sorry. No, it's not you. Taryn swallowed hard, fighting her sudden emotion. She didn't pull her hand out of his. She swallowed again, her eyes bright when they met his again. You make me happy, like Kurt used to. Her voice softened like she was trying so hard not to cry. He always goofed around and made us laugh. And after he died. Tears splashed down her face and she hastily wiped them away. Our family just stopped having fun. And I didn't realize how much I missed it until you came along. She sniffed, wiping her face again. You made me want to have fun again. And my parents won't let me spend time with the one person who reminds me of him. Oh hey, come here. Cliff pulled her closer until she was tucked into his chest. She sniffed and cried while he wrapped her up in his arms. He just couldn't stand seeing her cry like this, over something that was so very important and one of the reasons she was the person she was today. He wondered if she'd ever talked to anyone about it before. He wondered if all she'd needed was someone to listen and give her a hug. I don't expect you to be Kurt, Taryn said a few minutes later from the folds of his jacket. I know, he murmured softly into her hair. And if it's any consolation, your parents do love you. It makes sense why they started holding on tighter. Taryn nodded and stood up straighter, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. I know. She huffed a laugh and smiled up at him. This wasn't exactly the adventure I had in mind. Cliff chuckled, but replied, sometimes though, you have to talk through the past before you have the adventure. Taryn took his hand. Thank you. He nodded, already seeing how clear her eyes were. His resolve hardened. I'm going to talk to your dad. Her eyes widened. When? Tomorrow. But you won't. I won't tell him we were here. I'd prefer him to say yes when I ask him. Cliff took her other hand and squeezed them gently. I'm going to do it right. Show him that I'm more than an ingrate. Taryn snorted and poked him in the chest. Dork. You know it. He grinned back. He didn't know what exactly he would say to Mr. Brand just yet. He'd think about it long and hard for the rest of the night if he had to. But he'd do it. For this amazing girl standing in front of him, no task was too great. Toothless slid onto a patch of rocky dirt, his claws raking large grooves in the earth. Hiccup dismounted and rested a hand on his dragon's nose to keep him quiet. The interior of the houses around them were quiet, and he wanted to keep it that way. Ali the insincere did not like uninvited guests. Hiccup stared at the house where he and Adriana had stayed the night all those years ago. Exhausted and freezing from an hours-long flight, he'd done his best to acquire a small, quiet place to stay the night. Naturally, Ali had been unhelpful and belligerent. Brandine had intervened and offered them a place to stay at his home. Lofn had readily agreed and they had seemed like genuinely good people. In fact, they'd never given Hiccup reason to doubt. Brandine could be a bit crass at times, but so could Finn. He'd always been respectful and kind to Adriana. He'd made friends, gotten a few jobs and assisted in volunteer work around the village. Hiccup couldn't understand why Brandine would leave everything from his home and go through all the loopholes to start a new life on Berk just to throw it all away. Honestly, Hiccup didn't care. He was here for one thing and one thing only. He didn't need to know Brandine's reasons for why he did what he did. Brandine was going to pay for his crimes, and Hiccup wasn't leaving until he avenged his baby girl. Toothless nudged him toward the door they'd been watching for almost 5 minutes. Hiccup blinked out of his reverie, glancing up and down the street for guards. There hadn't been a sound in the entire street before or after they'd landed. Being the middle of the night and all, he was sure everyone was fast asleep. He needed to be as quiet as possible. Gathering his nerve, Hiccup marched up to the door and knocked 3 times. After a few minutes of silence, he repeated the gesture once again. He waited for neighbors to wake and poke their heads out the windows, but none came. He raised his hand once again to knock when he heard movement inside. A slight gutter of flame flashed in the window before he saw a middle-aged woman look through the window. Loffin's face lit up in surprise before the door swung open a moment later. Hiccup. She gestured inside, welcoming him inside her home. Hiccup gestured for Toothless to stay put before accepting her invitation. He said nothing as she closed the door and locked it. He narrowed his eyes slightly at the action, wondering if Brandine had told her to invite the chief in and lock the door should he ever come for a visit. Leaving Toothless outside could be a dangerous choice, but Hiccup knew that with all the anger coursing through his body, he could take a fight with Brandine. If Loffin fought him as well. What's happened? Loffin set her candle down on a small table. She wrapped a knitted shawl around her nightdress. Is Brandine all right? The question made him pause. She had to be protecting him. I don't know, Hiccup finally replied in a low voice. I need to speak to him. Where is he? Loffin's face morphed into confusion. What? I thought he was with you on Burke. Hiccup felt his face heat with anger. After all this time, this was not the roadblock he'd been expecting and his patience was already wearing thin. He hasn't been on Burke in 4 months. What? Stop playing games with me. Hiccup snapped. She jerked back in fear, her eyes widening. Where is Brandine? Loffin shook her head. I don't know, Hiccup. I thought he was on Burke. He hasn't stopped sending me letters. Hiccup's arms shook with suppressed rage. He had not traveled all the way out here for nothing. Show me his room. He murmured in a deadly silent voice. I am not leaving until I've talked with him. Loffin didn't question him. She slid along the wall past him and darted up the stairs, quick to avoid him as he followed. Hiccup knew if Brandine tried to escape any of the windows, Toothless would nab him. She led him to each room in the upstairs and even the downstairs, and though he searched every place he could, Brandine was not there. His bedroom was empty, the bed clean of sheets and dresser drawers bare. Only a few boxes of spare belongings in the corner, which Hiccup did not recognize. He turned in place in the empty room, hands on his hips. His prosthetic made a line of dust on the floorboards. This room had been empty for a long, long time. Loffin stood in the doorway, a hand clutching the shawl at her chest. She watched him warily. When was the last time you saw him? Hiccup asked softly. Loffin shook her head. Mother's Day. That's late April. He flew here on Sid and took me out for the day. But he went back to Burke when he left. Brandine hadn't been here since long before he'd raped Adriana. He wanted to think that Loffin was still covering for him, but why would she lie? He saw nothing but honesty and confusion on her face, and this bedroom was proof enough. Brandine had not been here in quite some time. Resigned, Hiccup shook his head and sat down on the empty bed. He was exhausted after an early morning, a total of 7 hours flight time combined for the entire day, most of the day devoted to training on jet. He'd made a split-second decision to come out here, hellbent on revenge, and Brandine was gone. The mattress dipped as Loffin sat beside him. For a few minutes, the house was quiet. Hiccup owed her an explanation and now he didn't know where to begin. Voicing his thoughts, Loffin asked, what did Brandine do? Her tone surprised him, almost resigned, as if she'd anticipated something. The thought rekindled his anger. But the words didn't come. He didn't want to beat the boy's mother down with his anger when it wasn't her crime. She didn't deserve that, and he had nearly knocked her door down in the middle of the night. Chief or no, he'd acted foolishly tonight. I'm sorry for all this. He replied, resting his elbows on his knees. I thought he would be here. Brandine wasn't always a stand-up child. Loffin said carefully. He started making better decisions about the time we met you and Adriana, and after that he was just so excited at the prospect of moving to Burke. I thought he was making a turn. Hiccup stood and paced the room. Wrong turn. Loffin pursed her lips. What happened? Again, he didn't know how to reply. Now that he'd pushed his anger aside, saving it for the day he would find Brandine, he had to tell Lofen in the calmest way possible. And hopefully incite her to help him find her son, even if it cost him his life. Hiccup paused his pacing and ran it all through his mind one more time. How did a sharp young man like Brandine come to Burke, ask to date the chief's daughter and promise her the world, just to turn around and treat her so horribly? Hiccup and Astrid had trusted him. He'd had a stable friendship with Finn. Adriana had even considered a serious future with him. So where had they all gone so wrong? Brandine had had a serious relationship with another girl, Dana, for a considerable amount of time while he'd been dating Adriana. But worst of all was the fact that when he was sleeping with Dana on possibly a regular basis, he'd made it his mission to force it on Adriana. The bed creaked and Lofen stepped in front of him, her crystal blue eyes concerned at his silence. Hiccup steeled himself. He raped my daughter. Lofen gasped, a shrill shriek. Her hands clapped against her mouth and she backed away, utterly horrified. No. Oh no. She shook her head, tears falling onto her hands. Hiccup swallowed his own sorrow before it could surge up. Now you understand why I'm here. Lofen nodded. He hadn't been sure what her reaction would be. He'd almost feared it, waiting for her to blame the situation on Adriana. He wouldn't allow such a response. But Lofen's sorrow could not be faked. Brandine might have been a two-faced scoundrel, but Lofen was real. That isn't all, Lofen. Hiccup took a deep breath. Lofen's eyes were puffy and red. Adriana is 4 months pregnant. Lofen's eyes closed, tears sliding down her face once more. She sat down on the mattress and covered her face in her hands. He felt strangely empty inside, unsure how to continue. She sniffed hard, pulling her light brown hair out of her face. Standing, she said, "Let me make us some tea. Then we can talk." Hiccup nodded, following her out the door. In silence, she stoked a fire and put a kettle of water on a hanging rod. The chief looked outside to see Toothless sleeping in a dark shadow alongside the house. Unless any of the guards specifically went looking, they wouldn't find the Night Fury. Hiccup flashed him a quick thumbs up before rejoining Lofen at the table. The kettle whistled and within a minute they both had steaming cups of tea in front of them. Though her eyes were mournful, Lofen's hands were steady as she took a sip and nodded. "Tell me everything." Hiccup obliged. He told her everything that Adriana had relayed to him and Astrid back on the ship. He told of her attempt at running away to find solace in Bogburglar Island and her rescue en route. Lofen pursed her lips at the accursed island's mention and whispered, "Poor girl." He assured her that since their return to Burke, Adriana had been thriving. "She's growing stronger every day, especially with her boyfriend, Eric." He paused. "One would think that I'd never allow another boy to date her, but I've discussed things with him and he intends to marry her. We aren't sure when yet, but he's a good match for her. And he wants to be this little one's father." "Yes." Hiccup nodded firmly. "He's a brave kid." "Indeed." Lofen took another drink of her tea and Hiccup followed suit. "Brandine never liked him. He mentioned Eric by name." Hiccup asked. "I never understood why." "Brandine likes to be the smartest in the room," Lofen said quietly. "Eric must match him in intellect if there's a rivalry. Eric is sharp. I wouldn't be surprised if Finn picks him as a strategist for his council someday." Hiccup thought of the fight the boys had had over Adriana's honor. If only he'd known then what he knew now, he would have been rolling on the ground with Brandine himself. The house was quiet for a few minutes while they thought. Hiccup emptied his cup and laced his fingers. "Lofen. I hope you understand that I need to find him. Do you know anything about his whereabouts?" Lofen shook her head. "I wish I did. A mother always protects her children, but in this, I cannot." "Anything at all?" She pursed her lips, looking unsure. "You might check Berserker Island." Hiccup frowned. "Why would he go there?" "He has some childhood friends there." Lofen replied quietly, her blue eyes averted. "As he grew older he visited them less, but if he was in trouble and didn't come to me, he could have gone to them instead. He might have wanted to spare me this trouble by going there." She rolled her eyes. Fool. Hiccup tapped his fingers against the table. I want you to know, Lofen, that while I don't know you very well, I've never felt threatened by you. I know what it's like to feel shame for the things your child has done. Please understand, I don't blame you for Brandine's crimes. Lofen nodded her thanks. Her face softened and for a slight moment, her expression looked familiar. The moment passed and Hiccup